Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories, here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Thomas Mercer, and I am 34 years old. This happened in October 2023. The wind, rattled through the forest, can still make it to the ranger station before sunrise. The tunnel stretched ahead like the throat of some ancient beast, timber supports groaning under the weight of earth and stone above. My flashlight beam caught glimpses of old mining equipment, rusted tools, and occasionally more disturbing things. Fragments of cloth, what might have been bone, a boot with something still inside it. I tried to keep Laura from seeing these grim discoveries. We moved as quickly as we dared, the uneven ground and low ceiling making progress difficult. Laura leaned heavily against me, her strength seemingly waxing and waning in unpredictable cycles. One moment she would walk almost normally. The next, she would stumble as if on the verge of collapse. "How much farther?" I asked, checking my watch. The face had fogged over, the hands spinning randomly, just as my grandfather's watch had done whenever I brought it into these mountains. "Not far," Laura said, her voice steady but somehow distant. "The main shaft should connect to the natural caverns just ahead." The maintenance tunnel widened, opening into what had once been the primary mine shaft. Rail tracks, rusted and twisted, ran along the floor. The ceiling rose higher, lost in darkness beyond my flashlight's reach. The air felt heavier here, thick with dust and something else, a coppery scent that made my stomach turn. "Laura, how did you know about the mine connecting to caverns?" I asked, the question that had been nagging at me finally breaking through my focus on escape. "That's not in any public record." She didn't answer immediately, her face half turned away from me. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed subtly. Still Laura's, but with new cadences, new rhythms. "You're right to question," she said. "Your grandfather kept many secrets, as did his father before him. The Mercer men have served as guardians for generations, willing or unwilling." I stopped, turning her to face me fully. "Laura, talk to me. What's happening to you?" In the harsh beam of the flashlight, her face seemed different, the angles sharper, the eyes deeper set. She blinked slowly like someone unused to the mechanism of eyelids. "She opened herself to me," Laura said, gesturing to her bandaged palm. "Blood, freely given, creates a bridge. I am Laura, but I am also more." My skin crawled. "The woman by the lake? The one with your face?" A slow nod. A reflection. A possibility. What becomes of those who remain behind? "I don't understand," I said, backing away slightly. "The hunger beneath the mountain must be fed," Laura said, her voice now layering over itself, as if two people spoke simultaneously. "Every 30 years, the gate weakens. Your grandfather failed his duty, refused his final offering. The debt remained. But blood calls to blood. His grandson would finish what he started." My back hit the tunnel wall. I raised the flashlight higher, illuminating Laura's face fully. For an instant, just a flicker, I saw the aged, withered countenance of the lake woman superimposed over her features. "You're not Laura," I whispered. "I am," she insisted, blinking rapidly now, as if fighting something inside her. "Thomas, I'm still here, but she's showing me things. The truth. Your family's history with this place." She staggered suddenly, clutching her head. "Fight her, Thomas. Don't let her in like I did." Before I could respond, a thunderous crack sounded from above. We both looked up as dust and small rocks showered down from the ceiling. The timbers supporting the mine shaft groaned ominously. "They're breaking through!" Laura gasped, her voice her own again. "Run!" We fled deeper into the mine, the sounds of splintering wood and falling rock pursuing us. The main shaft split ahead. one tunnel continuing straight, another branching left. Laura pulled me toward the left branch without hesitation. "How do you know which way?" I demanded even as I followed. "She knows," Laura said grimly, "and right now, that's keeping us alive." The left tunnel descended at a steeper angle, the man-made supports gradually giving way to natural stone as we entered what appeared to be a genuine cave system. The air changed. Moister, cooler, tinged with the scent of wet rock. Behind us, the crashing and splintering grew louder, punctuated by those same inhuman howls we'd heard in the forest. They were inside the mine now, pursuing us through the tunnels. "There!" Laura pointed ahead where the passage widened into a larger chamber. "Cathedral Cavern. The exit is on the far side." We emerged into a vast underground space, my flashlight inadequate to illuminate its full dimensions. What I could see stole my breath. Soaring limestone columns stretched from floor to ceiling like the pillars of some pagan temple. Crystal formations caught and reflected my light in 1,000 glittering points. Under different circumstances, it would have been beautiful. But as we crossed the chamber floor, my light caught other features that sent ice through my veins. Crude stone altars positioned throughout the cavern, their surfaces stained dark with what could only be ancient bloodstains. And carved into the walls, symbols identical to those I'd seen on the stick dolls in the forest. "Don't look," Laura said, tugging me forward. "Keep moving." Halfway across the chamber, Laura suddenly collapsed, dropping to her knees with a cry of pain. I knelt beside her, panic rising as I saw fresh blood seeping through the makeshift bandage on her palm. "It's burning," she gasped. "Thomas, something's happening." Her back arched unnaturally, her head thrown back. When she spoke again, it was in that layered voice, both hers and not hers. "The sun rises, the gate closes. The hungry ones return to their sleep until they wake again." Laura's eyes rolled back, showing only whites. Her body convulsed once, twice, then went limp in my arms. "Laura!" I shook her gently, then more frantically. "Laura, wake up!" Behind us, the tunnel erupted with sound, scrabbling inhuman noises growing rapidly closer. My flashlight beam, swinging wildly in my panic, caught a glimpse of pale, elongated limbs emerging from the darkness. I lifted Laura's unconscious form and ran for the far side of the chamber, where a narrow passage promised escape. My lungs burned, muscles screaming with fatigue, but terror drove me forward. The passage inclined upward, rough stone giving way to smoother surfaces, the air growing fresher. Light appeared ahead. Not my flashlight, but the gray glow of dawn filtering down from above. The passage ended in a jumble of fallen rocks that formed a natural staircase leading up to a narrow opening, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. I shifted Laura's weight, preparing to climb when her eyes suddenly flew open. They were still rolled back, showing only whites, and when she spoke, it was in that ancient, decayed voice I'd come to dread. "Too late, Thomas Mercer. The sun rises, but the debt remains unpaid." Her hand, the cut hand, shot up and gripped my throat with unnatural strength. I staggered backward, struggling to breathe, to break her grip. "Laura," I choked out, "fight it!" Her face contorted, features shifting between her own and something older, decayed. Her grip loosened for an instant, enough for me to break free and stumble away from her. Laura's body rose to its feet without her seeming to use her muscles, as if pulled upright by invisible strings. She stood unnaturally still, head tilted at a painful angle. "The willing sacrifice was incomplete," she said in that terrible layered voice, "but it bought time. 30 years, and when the gate weakens again..." Her hand rose, pointing directly at me. "Your bloodline will answer. Your children will come to these mountains drawn by the same call you could not resist." "I have no children," I said, backing toward the exit. A terrible smile spread across Laura's face, both her own and not her own. "Not yet," she said. "But you will. The seed is planted. The cycle continues." With dawning horror, I remembered our last night together before the separation. A desperate, passionate attempt to save a marriage already broken. Months ago now. "No," I whispered. "Yes," the thing wearing Laura's face said. "She carries the next Mercer, the next guardian, the next key to the gate." Laura's body convulsed again, more violently this time. She dropped to her knees, hands clutching her head. When she looked up, her eyes were her own again, filled with terror and understanding. "Thomas," she gasped. "Run! Get out while you can." "Not without you," I said, moving toward her. "You have to," she cried. "I opened the connection willingly. I'm bound to this place now. To her. But you're not. Not yet." Behind her, the pale creatures from the forest had emerged into the chamber. Dozens of them now, their misshapen forms moving with that same jerking gait toward us. Toward Laura. "I won't leave you," I insisted, reaching for her. Laura scrambled backward away from my outstretched hand. "You must," she said, tears streaming down her face. "For our child. Find your grandfather's complete journal. Learn the truth. Break the cycle." The creatures were almost upon us now. Laura rose to her feet, facing them with strange dignity. She turned to me one last time, her face fully her own, eyes clear. "I love you, Thomas. I always have. Now go." She turned away, walking directly toward the approaching creatures. They surrounded her, not attacking, but enfolding her into their midst like supplicants greeting a priestess. Laura didn't struggle as they led her back toward the heart of the cavern. The last I saw of her, she stood tall among them, her white face looking back at me once more before the darkness swallowed her. I stood frozen, torn between impossible choices. The gray light from above grew stronger. Dawn had arrived. As if responding to the sunlight, the creatures retreated deeper into the cavern, taking Laura with them. Their howls faded to whispers, then silence. Numb with shock and grief, I turned and climbed through the rocks toward the surface. The opening led to a steep ravine I recognized, less than a mile from the ranger station. I emerged into full daylight, the morning sun burning away the lingering mist as birds sang in the trees around me. The world seemed obscenely normal after the horrors below. I made my way to the ranger station in a daze, fabricating a story about getting lost, about Laura going missing. Search parties were organized. The woods were combed for days. They found Laura's campsite by the lake, her backpack, her phone, but no trace of Laura herself. I never told anyone the truth. Who would believe me? 3 weeks later, sitting alone in our half-empty house, Laura's belongings still where she'd left them, I found the package she'd mentioned, hidden in the attic, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with leather. My grandfather's complete journal, including the missing pages, and with it, a letter from Laura, dated the day before she'd come looking for me in the mountains. Thomas. If you're reading this, I didn't make it back. I've discovered something terrible about your family history. About the Henderson mine. About the legends of the hungry ones beneath Avalanche Lake. Your grandfather wasn't the hero his obituary claimed. He survived the mine collapse by making a deal with something ancient, something that has attached itself to your bloodline. I'm going to find you, to warn you. But if I fail, know this. I believe I'm pregnant. If I'm right, our child will be the next in line to fulfill the debt your grandfather left unpaid. The cycle repeats every 30 years. You must find a way to break it. The journal explains everything. The ritual, the gate, the sacrifice. There may be a way to end it permanently, but it requires a Mercer to return to the mountain willingly, to close the gate from within. I have always loved you, even when we couldn't make our marriage work. Whatever happens, don't blame yourself. And if I don't return, protect our child. Don't let him or her be drawn back to those mountains. All my love. Laura. I placed my hand on my stomach, thinking of the child Laura had been carrying. My child, who would be born without ever knowing their mother, the next Mercer, the next guardian of the gate, unless I could find a way to break the cycle. I opened my grandfather's journal and began to read, the first pale light of dawn creeping through the windows. Outside, a raven landed on the sill, watching me with obsidian eyes that reflected nothing. The mountains were waiting, and they had all the time in the world. My name is Thomas Mercer, and I am 34 years old. This happened in October 2023, but the story isn't over yet. Opie of the Adirondack High Peaks wilderness, shaking loose the red-orange leaves that marked autumn's arrival. I'd planned this solo hiking trip for months, 3 days of isolation to clear my head and reset after my divorce was finalized. The familiar weight of my pack against my shoulders brought comfort as I followed the trail markers deeper into the wilderness, away from cell reception and the suffocating responsibilities I'd left behind in Albany. The trail to Avalanche Lake wasn't particularly challenging for someone with my experience, but that late afternoon, something about the forest felt different. Shadows seemed to stretch longer between the trees, and the natural sounds of the woods occasionally fell into unnatural silence. A raven watched me from a low-hanging branch, its obsidian eyes reflecting nothing. "Just a bird," I muttered, shouldering past. I'd hiked these mountains dozens of times since childhood. There was nothing to fear here. How wrong I was. I made camp near the lake just as dusk settled in, pitched my tent, and lit a small fire. The shadows deepened around the edge of my campsite, seeming to press inward against the circle of firelight. I found myself repeatedly glancing over my shoulder, plagued by the sensation of being observed. The feeling was so intense that several times I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" Only the whisper of wind through the pines answered me. After a simple dinner of dehydrated chili, I sat by my fire nursing a flask of whiskey and watching the flames dance. I'd come here to escape thoughts of Laura and our failed marriage, but memories haunted me like persistent ghosts. The way she'd looked at me during our final argument, like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. Maybe I'd been a stranger to myself for years. A twig snapped in the darkness beyond my fire, sharp and deliberate. "Hello?" I called, reaching for my flashlight. The powerful beam cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but trees and underbrush. That night, I dreamed of a woman standing motionless at the edge of the lake. She wore a white dress that remained perfectly still despite the wind that howled around her. Though her back was to me, I knew with inexplicable certainty that I should not see her face. In my dream, I called out to her, and slowly she began to turn. I woke abruptly to absolute silence. No wind, no insects, no distant call of night birds. My watch read 3:17 a.m. The fire had died to embers that cast a dull red glow across the campsite. The air inside my tent felt oppressively thick, as though the oxygen had been slowly leached away. And there was something else. A smell, earthy and organic, like wet soil and rotting vegetation. Unzipping my tent, I peered outside. The moonlight revealed nothing unusual, yet the silence persisted, unnatural and smothering. I crawled back into my sleeping bag, my heart hammering in my chest as I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just the ordinary strangeness of woods at night. I didn't fall back asleep until the first gray light of dawn seeped through the tent fabric. Morning arrived with fog so thick I could barely see the lake 20 yards from my tent. I forced down some instant coffee and oatmeal, trying to shake off the lingering unease from the night. My original plan had been to hike deeper into the wilderness, to Indian Pass and the ruins of the old Henderson mine, but something in me hesitated. I considered packing up and heading back to civilization. "Don't be ridiculous," I told myself aloud, voice too loud in the quiet forest. "One weird night and you're ready to bail?" I needed this time alone. I needed to prove to myself I could still function independently after 5 years of marriage. So I shouldered my pack and continued on the trail that would lead me deeper into the High Peaks region, away from easy access to roads and people. The fog persisted throughout the morning, turning the familiar landscape alien and disorienting. Twice I had to check my map and compass when trail markers seemed to disappear or lead in directions that didn't match my memory. By noon, the sun had burned away enough mist that I could see the rugged outline of Mount Colden looming ahead. I paused for lunch on a rocky outcropping, the vast expanse of wilderness spreading below me. That's when I first noticed the footprints. They paralleled my own trail for a while before veering off toward a denser section of forest. Human footprints, definitely, but something about them seemed wrong. The stride too long, the impression too deep. I told myself it was just another hiker, though I hadn't seen anyone else since entering the wilderness area. The remainder of the day's hike was uneventful, though the feeling of being watched never fully dissipated. I made camp earlier than planned in a small clearing not far from a stream. As I gathered firewood, I discovered a crude arrangement of sticks formed into what looked like a primitive doll hanging from a low branch. Probably left by campers or local kids, I reasoned, though the nearest town was miles away. I left it untouched. That night, as darkness fell, I noticed the fire behaved strangely. The flames burned with an unusual intensity, occasionally flaring green when I added certain pieces of wood. Probably just minerals in the timber, I told myself, though I'd never seen it before in all my years of camping. I was writing in my journal when I heard it. A voice calling from the darkness, so faint I initially thought it was just the wind. Thomas. I froze, pen hovering above paper. Thomas, help me. It was a woman's voice, distant yet somehow intimate, as though whispered directly into my ear. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding. "Who's there?" I shouted, gripping my flashlight like a weapon. Silence answered me, but as I swept the light across the trees surrounding my camp, I caught a flash of movement, something pale ducking behind a thick trunk. Without thinking, I plunged into the darkness after it. "Hello? Do you need help?" I called, crashing through underbrush, my light bouncing wildly across trees and rocks. 20 yards from camp, I stopped, suddenly aware of how foolish I was being. I stood alone among ancient trees, the only sound my own ragged breathing. My campfire was now just a distant orange glow. As I turned to head back, my light caught something on a tree trunk. Marks carved into the bark, fresh marks, the exposed wood still oozing sap. Laura is waiting. My ex-wife's name carved into a tree, miles from civilization. Ice flooded my veins as I backed away, then turned and ran for the safety of my campfire. I burst into the clearing, chest heaving, eyes wild as I scanned the surrounding darkness. Nothing moved in the shadows, but the sense of being watched had intensified to an almost physical pressure. With trembling hands, I stoked the fire higher, feeding it until the flames leapt tall enough to push back the oppressive darkness. I retrieved my hunting knife from my pack, the weight of it reassuring in my palm. Sleep was out of the question. I would wait for dawn, then hike out as quickly as possible. As the night deepened, strange sounds emerged from the forest, creaks and whispers that might have been the wind, if the air wasn't so still. Occasionally, I heard what sounded like footsteps circling my camp, just beyond the reach of the firelight. Twice more, I heard my name called, the voice each time sounding more like Laura's, though with a strange, hollow quality that raised the hair on my arms. I gripped my knife tighter and fed more wood to the flames. Around 2 a.m., my fire suddenly dimmed, as though something was smothering it. The flames shrank despite my frantic efforts, darkness encroaching until only a small circle of light remained. And in that darkness, I began to see eyes, dozens of reflective pinpoints staring at me from between the trees. "Stay back!" I shouted, waving my knife. "Whatever you want, stay back!" The eyes blinked in perfect unison. Then the whispers began. Not just one voice now, but many, layered over each other in a cacophony of unintelligible sounds. From within that jumble of noise, phrases occasionally emerged with terrifying clarity. "She suffered, Thomas. You left her alone. Now you're alone. We've been waiting for you." I pressed my hands to my ears, but the voices seemed to bypass my hearing, manifesting directly in my mind. Memories I'd suppressed came flooding back. Laura's tearful face as I walked out the door for the last time. The phone calls I'd ignored in the weeks before the divorce. The text message I'd received but never responded to. "I need you. Please call me. Something's wrong." "Stop it," I screamed into the darkness. The whispers ceased abruptly. The fire flared suddenly, illuminating a figure standing at the edge of my camp. It wore Laura's face, but wrong. The proportions subtly distorted, the eyes too large and dark, the smile stretched unnaturally wide. It, wore a white dress that seemed to emit a faint phosphorescence. "You never came back for me, Thomas," it said in Laura's voice, though the mouth didn't move in sync with the words. I waited and waited. "You're not real," I whispered, backing away. "Laura's in Albany. She's fine." The thing tilted its head at an impossible angle. "Am I fine, Thomas? Why don't you check your phone?" "There's no service here," I said automatically. The creature's smile widened further, stretching literally from ear to ear. "Are you sure about that? Perhaps you've been ignoring the signs. Again." With shaking hands, I pulled my phone from my pocket, dead for a day now without charging. But as I held it, the screen suddenly illuminated, showing a cascade of missed calls and text messages from Laura, dating back months. The most recent was from that very night. "I'm coming to find you. Thomas, wait for me by the lake." The timestamp read 11:42 p.m., less than 3 hours ago. When I looked up, the creature was gone, but the forest around me had fallen into that unnatural silence again. Even the crackling of my fire seemed muted, distant. I stood frozen, clutching my useless phone, torn between disbelief and mounting horror. That's when I heard the scream, unmistakably human, unmistakably terrified, coming from the direction of the lake I'd passed earlier that day. It was Laura's voice. Every instinct told me to stay put, to wait for daylight, but deeper than fear was the sudden, overwhelming certainty that Laura was actually here, in these woods, in danger. Despite everything, I couldn't ignore her. I grabbed my flashlight and knife and plunged into the forest toward the sound. The terrain was treacherous in the dark, roots and rocks conspiring to trip me as I half ran, half stumbled through the trees. My flashlight beam bounced wildly, creating disorienting shadows that seemed to move independently of the objects casting them. I called Laura's name repeatedly, my voice growing hoarse. No response came, but I pressed on, following some internal compass that pulled me toward the lake. The trees began to thin, and I could smell water in the air. Then my light caught something pale among the undergrowth ahead, a scrap of white fabric snagged on a thorny bush. I approached slowly, dread building in my chest. It was a piece of white cotton, torn from what might have been a dress, and beside it, half hidden by fallen leaves, was a smartphone in a case I recognized immediately. The vintage floral pattern Laura had loved. I picked it up with trembling fingers. The screen was cracked but illuminated, opened to a text conversation. Our text conversation. But as I scrolled up, I saw messages I had no memory of sending. "Meet me at Avalanche Lake. I need to explain everything. I've set up camp on the North Shore. Follow the markers I left. I'm waiting for you, Laura. Please hurry." "I didn't send these," I whispered to the silent forest. "I didn't." A twig snapped behind me. I whirled, light and knife raised defensively. Nothing. Another snap to my right, then my left. They were surrounding me. My light caught movement, a figure darting between trees. Not Laura this time, but something low to the ground, moving with a jerking, unnatural gait. I caught a glimpse of pallid skin and elongated limbs before it vanished into darkness. I ran. Blind panic propelled me forward with no direction except away. Branches whipped my face. Roots seemed to reach up to tangle my feet. Behind me, I could hear them pursuing. Not just one, but many, crashing through the underbrush with inhuman speed. The sounds they made were no longer recognizably human, high-pitched keening mixed with guttural growls. I broke through the tree line and found myself at the edge of Avalanche Lake, its black waters perfectly still under the moonlight. To my right, the shoreline curved away into darkness. To my left, steep cliffs rose, offering no escape. Behind me, the sounds of pursuit grew closer. With no other option, I turned right and sprinted along the shore, searching desperately for a path, a hiding place, anything. My light bounced across the rocky beach, then froze on an object ahead. A backpack. Laura's backpack, recognizable by the collection of enamel pins she'd attached to the straps. Beside it was a small tent, erected haphazardly, its entrance flap open and waving gently in the breeze that had begun to stir across the lake. "Laura?" I called, approached cautiously. "Laura, are you here?" The tent was empty but recently occupied. A sleeping bag lay unzipped, personal items scattered around as if the occupant had left in a hurry. A journal lay open, and I recognized Laura's handwriting immediately. The last entry was dated that very day. "I think I'm being followed. Something is watching me from the trees. The rangers said Thomas was camping near here, but I can't find any sign of him. The messages told me to come to the North Shore, but this can't be right. Something feels wrong. The birds have stopped singing. If anyone finds this—" The entry ended abruptly, a long scrawl of ink trailing off the page as if she'd been interrupted mid-sentence. I backed away from the tent, ice forming in my veins. Laura was really here, looking for me, because of messages I hadn't sent. And now, she was gone. "Laura!" I screamed, my voice echoing across the water. The pursuing sounds from the forest had stopped. An unnatural silence descended, broken only by the gentle lapping of water against the shore. Then, from across the lake, came an answering cry. "Thomas, help me!" I swung my light toward the sound. On the opposite shore, a small figure waved frantically. Even at this distance, I could tell it was Laura. Her movements, her outline, unmistakable to me even after our separation. "Laura, stay there! I'm coming!" I shouted. There was no trail along the lake's edge. I would have to go back into the forest to circle around. As I turned to find a path, my light swept across the water and caught another figure standing perfectly still in the middle of the lake. Standing on the water. It was the woman from my dream. Her white dress now stained with dark patches, her hair hanging in wet ropes around a face I still couldn't see. She stood at least 50 yards from shore, on water I knew to be dozens of feet deep. As my light illuminated her, she slowly began to turn. "Thomas, don't look at her. Run!" Laura's voice called frantically from across the lake. I tore my eyes away and plunged back into the forest, searching desperately for a trail that would lead me around to the other side. The undergrowth seemed denser now, the trees pressing closer together as if intentionally impeding my progress. Behind me, I heard a splash, as if something large had entered the water. I pushed harder, ignoring the branches that tore at my clothes and skin. The terrain grew steeper as I was forced to climb the ridge that bordered the lake. My breath came in ragged gasps, my legs burning with exertion. But Laura's voice, still calling my name, drove me onward. The ridge grew narrower, cliff sides dropping away on either side. In the moonlight, I could see the lake below me, its surface now disturbed by ripples spreading from multiple points, as if several large objects were moving through the water, converging on the far shore where I'd seen Laura. "No!" I gasped, redoubling my efforts. The ridge began to descend and I caught glimpses of the far shore through the trees. Laura's voice had stopped. The silence that replaced it was worse than any scream. I burst from the forest onto a small, pebbly beach, chest heaving as I swung my light across the area. "Laura!" I called. The beam caught a figure huddled against a boulder. Laura, her arms wrapped around herself, shaking violently. I rushed to her side, dropping to my knees. "Laura, it's me. What are you doing here?" She looked up, her face tear-streaked and pale with fear. "You told me to come," she whispered. "You said you needed to talk, that it was important." "I didn't send those messages," I said, helping her to her feet. "Something is wrong here. We need to leave now." She nodded shakily. "I've been trying to. The trails keep leading me in circles, and the things in the forest. Thomas, I've seen things." "Don't think about it. Just stay with me," I said, taking her hand. It was ice cold. "We'll follow the shore until we hit the main trail. Keep moving. Don't look back." We set off along the beach, my light sweeping constantly across our surroundings. Laura stumbled alongside me, occasionally glancing nervously over her shoulder. "How did you find me?" I asked as we walked, trying to keep her focused, keep her talking. "Your messages had landmarks," she said. "Signs you left. Stick figures hanging from trees. Symbols carved in bark. My blood ran cold. I didn't leave those." She stopped abruptly. "Then who did?" Before I could answer, a sound came from the water, a wet, slithering noise. We both turned. My light revealed ripples approaching the shore, something moving beneath the surface. "Run," I whispered. We fled along the shoreline, the beam of my flashlight bouncing wildly ahead of us. The main trail had to be close. If we could reach it, follow it back to the ranger station. The trees ahead rustled, though there was no wind. Dark shapes moved between trunks, the same elongated, jerking figures I'd glimpsed earlier. They were hurting us, I realized with growing horror, driving us along the shore, toward the narrow peninsula that jutted into the deepest part of the lake. "Thomas," Laura gasped, pointing ahead. At the end of the peninsula stood a crude structure, a framework of branches lashed together with what looked like hair and strips of cloth. Hanging from this framework were dozens of the stick dolls I'd seen earlier, twisting slowly in the night air. And standing before this shrine was a figure in a now familiar white dress, back turned to us. We skidded to a halt. Behind us, the shapes in the forest pressed closer, blocking retreat. To either side was the black water of the lake, now rippling with movement just beneath the surface. "What do they want?" Laura whispered, clutching my arm. The figure at the shrine slowly began to turn. "Don't look at her face," I said, remembering Laura's warning from earlier. I kept my eyes fixed on the ground, pulling Laura against me protectively. "Thomas Mercer," came a voice, not Laura's now, but older, cracked with age or decay. "You have brought her back to us, as was promised." "I promised nothing," I said, still avoiding looking directly at the figure. "Let us leave. We won't come back." A wheezing sound that might have been laughter. "Your grandfather promised. Blood oath sealed in sacrifice. Every generation, one must return. You bear his name, you bear his debt." My grandfather, Thomas Mercer Sr., had died before I was born. I knew little about him, except that he'd worked for a mining company in the Adirondacks in his youth. There had always been a reticence in my family about discussing him. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said. "What debt?" "The Henderson mine," the voice said. 1952, 13 men trapped, 12 died. Your grandfather survived because he promised to return, to bring others, to feed the hungry ones beneath the mountain. Laura trembled against me. "Thomas, what is she talking about?" The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. My inexplicable draw to these mountains throughout my life. The recurring nightmares of drowning in darkness that had plagued me since childhood. My grandfather's watch passed down to me that had always kept perfect time except when I was in these woods. My grandfather escaped the mine collapse, I said slowly. He made a deal with something to survive. "And now the debt comes due," the voice said. "The hunger grows. The old gods wait. Only blood satisfies." From the woods emerged the shambling figures I'd glimpsed earlier, emaciated, pale creatures that might once have been human, moving with jerky, broken motions. Their faces were stretched and malformed, eyes sunken into dark hollows, mouths permanently fixed in silent screams. The miners, I realized. What was left of them after 70 years in the darkness beneath the mountain. "You led me here," Laura said suddenly, a note of betrayal in her voice. "The messages, they came from your phone." "I didn't send them," I insisted, still holding her tightly. "Something used my number, my identity." "He speaks truth," said the woman in white, "but also lies. Part of him has always known. The blood remembers, even when the mind forgets." She began to turn further, her face coming into view. I averted my eyes, but Laura gasped. "No," she whispered, "it can't be." Despite every instinct screaming against it, I looked. The woman's face was Laura's face, but aged decades, weathered and lined, eyes clouded with cataracts yet somehow still piercing. A future Laura, worn by unimaginable suffering. "What you see is possibility," the thing wearing Laura's aged face said. "What becomes of her if you fail your duty? Trapped between worlds, a guardian of the gate, neither living nor dead. As I have been since my Thomas brought me here in 1983. The creatures from the forest had formed a circle around us, closing in slowly. From the lake came more sounds, splashing and slithering as things emerged from the water. My mind raced desperately. There had to be a way out, a loophole in this nightmare logic. "The debt requires a mercer," I said slowly, "and a sacrifice." The creature nodded, Laura's aged face splitting into a terrible smile. I made my decision in an instant, shoving Laura hard toward the gap in the circle of creatures. "Run!" I shouted. "Don't stop for anything." She stumbled forward, then caught herself. "Thomas, no!" "Go!" I roared, drawing my knife and facing the creatures. "I'm staying. I'm the mercer, I'm the sacrifice." The aged Laura thing tilted her head. "Noble, but incorrect. The debt requires a mercer to bring the sacrifice, not to be it." Ice flooded my veins as understanding dawned. I wasn't brought here to die. I was brought here to lead Laura to her death. "No." I lurched toward Laura, but the ground beneath me suddenly softened, my feet sinking into what had been solid earth moments before. The creatures closed in around Laura, who screamed and fought as they seized her with their pallid, elongated hands. I struggled to free myself, but the earth continued to swallow me already up to my knees. "Take me instead," I shouted. "I'm willing. She isn't." "That is why she is suitable," the aged Laura thing said dispassionately. "Innocence feeds them better than guilt." The real Laura's eyes locked with mine as the creatures dragged her toward the shrine, her expression shifting from terror to a strange, calm resolve. "Thomas," she called, her voice steadier than seemed possible. "It's not your fault. They've been planning this since before we met. Check your grandfather's journal. The missing pages." How did she know about my grandfather's journal? About the pages that had been torn out before it was passed down to me? The earth had swallowed me to my waist now, the pressure crushing against my ribs, making it difficult to breathe. I still fought, using my knife to stab at the ground around me, trying desperately to gain purchase. Laura was at the shrine now, the creatures arranging her beneath the hanging dolls. She didn't struggle anymore, but kept her eyes fixed on mine. "I figured it out too late," she called to me. "When your messages led me here, I checked our anniversary coordinates." Our anniversary coordinates? We didn't have... And then I remembered. On our first date, I'd given Laura a necklace with coordinates engraved on the back, the location of the restaurant where we'd met. It had seemed romantic at the time, but I'd forgotten about it until now. "The coordinates," I gasped against the crushing pressure. "What about them?" "They weren't for the restaurant," Laura said as the aged doppelganger approached her with something glinting in hand. "They were for here, this exact spot. You've been their instrument all along, Thomas. We both have." The ground had reached my chest now. I could barely move, barely breathe. My knife hand remained free, and I slashed desperately at the earth to no effect. The aged Laura thing stood before the real Laura now, Raising what I could see was a crude stone knife. The creatures held Laura immobile beneath the shrine of dolls. "No," I screamed, using the last of my strength to fling my own knife. It spun through the air, catching the moonlight, and buried itself in the back of the aged Laura thing. She staggered, turning to me with an expression of surprise that melted into a terrible smile. She reached behind herself, drawing out the knife as if it were no more than a minor inconvenience. Black ichor dripped from the blade. "The debt will be paid," she said simply. But in that moment of distraction, something unexpected happened. The real Laura lunged forward, her hand closing around the stone knife. In one fluid motion, she twisted free of the creature's grip and slashed the blade across her own palm. "I pay the debt freely," she shouted, her blood spattering across the shrine. "By my will, not his compulsion. That was the loophole, wasn't it? Willing sacrifice, not coerced." The forest fell absolutely silent. Even the creatures froze, their misshapen heads turning toward the aged Laura thing as if awaiting instruction. The doppelganger's face contorted with rage. "Clever girl," she hissed, "but partial payment only buys partial freedom." The ground around me suddenly released its grip, expelling me onto the surface. I gasped for air, muscles screaming as I dragged myself to my feet. The creatures had backed away from Laura, who stood bleeding but defiant before the shrine. The aged Laura thing regarded her with cold calculation. "Run to him," she said finally. "You have until dawn. If you reach the ranger station before sunrise, the debt is suspended until the next generation." Without waiting for further invitation, I staggered to Laura's side, supporting her as we backed away from the shrine. "Is this a trick?" I whispered. "No," Laura said with strange certainty. "Rules are rules. I've studied this ever since I found your grandfather's missing journal pages hidden in your attic. I've been trying to warn you, but something always interfered. Phone calls dropped, emails disappeared, texts went unsent." We retreated along the peninsula, the creatures parting to let us pass, their hollow eyes tracking our movement. The aged Laura thing remained by the shrine, watching us with an expression too complex to name. As we reached the tree line, Laura stumbled, weak from blood loss. I lifted her into my arms and began to run, following the shore until we found the main trail. Behind us, howls rose from multiple throats, a hunting chorus that chilled my blood. "They're coming," Laura gasped. "The game's begun." I ran as I'd never run before. Laura clutched against my chest, her blood soaking my shirt. The miles-long trail to the ranger station stretched ahead of us, and somewhere behind, the sounds of pursuit grew steadily closer. The eastern sky had begun to lighten. We had perhaps an hour before dawn. Laura's breathing grew more labored, her skin frighteningly pale. She needed medical attention. The cut on her palm was deep, still bleeding despite the makeshift bandage I'd torn from my shirt. "Keep going," she murmured when I slowed to check on her. "They're gaining." She was right. The sounds of pursuit had grown closer, branches breaking, underbrush rustling, occasionally that same high-pitched keening that was almost, but not quite, human. The main trail forked ahead. Left would take us toward the ranger station, but it was longer, winding along ridgelines. Right was more direct but passed dangerously close to the old Henderson mine entrance, sealed decades ago after the collapse. "Left," Laura said weakly. "Don't go near the mine." I nodded, veering left onto the wider path. The first genuine rays of sun broached the horizon, casting long shadows through the trees. Maybe an hour until full sunrise. We might make it. Then Laura seized in my arms, her back arching unnaturally. Her eyes rolled back, showing only whites, and when she spoke, the voice wasn't hers. "Wrong way, Thomas," she said in the aged, cracked voice of her doppelganger. "The mind calls to its own." I nearly dropped her in shock. Laura's body convulsed again, then went limp. When her eyes opened, they were her own again, filled with terror. "She's inside me," she whispered. When I took the blade, opened a connection. "Fight it," I urged, still moving as quickly as I dared along the path. "We're almost there." But the trail ahead suddenly split again, another fork not marked on any map I'd studied. Both paths looked identical, winding away through increasingly dense forest. I hesitated, precious seconds ticking by. "Which way?" I asked desperately. Laura's expression clouded, confusion and fear mingling in her eyes. I don't know, Thomas. I can't think clearly. She's in my head, showing me things. Your grandfather. The mine." I chose the left path again, but after 50 yards it narrowed dramatically, becoming little more than a game trail. Behind us, the sounds of pursuit grew louder, no longer trying to disguise their presence, crashing through underbrush with inhuman speed. "Wrong choice," Laura murmured, her voice drifting between her own and something older, decayed. "Always the wrong choice, Thomas Mercer." I backtracked frantically, taking the right fork this time. The path widened again, but curved subtly, leading us gradually westward, away from the ranger station, I realized with growing horror, leading us toward the abandoned mine. Laura grew heavier in my arms, her consciousness seeming to fade in and out. The sky continued to lighten, perhaps 40 minutes until full sunrise now, and the pursuers were gaining steadily. I broke into a clearing and stopped short. Ahead stood a small, dilapidated structure, the old Henderson Mining Company office, abandoned decades ago. Beyond it, partially concealed by vegetation, the sealed entrance to the mine shaft was just visible. Heavy timber beams bolted across the opening, warning signs faded but still legible. "No," I gasped. "This isn't the way." Laura stirred in my arms. "Inside," she said, her voice her own again, though weak. "There's another way out. Connects to Cathedral Caverns. Emerges near the ranger station." "How do you know that?" I demanded. "Your grandfather's journal," she whispered. "The missing pages. I found them when I was packing my things, after you left." I hesitated, torn between trusting her and my own instinct to get as far from the mine as possible. The sounds of pursuit made the decision for me. They were almost upon us. I sprinted for the mining office. The door hung askew on rusted hinges, opening into a single room thick with dust and cobwebs. Rusted filing cabinets stood against one wall, a collapsed desk against another, and in the back, a trap door in the floor stood open, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. "Down," Laura urged. "Hurry." I lowered her to the floor, then fumbled for my flashlight. The beam revealed a maintenance tunnel below, shored up with old timbers, stretching away into blackness. "I'll go first," I said, starting down the ladder. Once at the bottom, I reached up to help Laura, who descended with surprising strength for someone who had seemed near unconsciousness moments before. As her feet touched the ground beside me, something crashed against the building above. Inhuman howls echoed through the trap door. "Close it," Laura hissed. I reached up and slammed the trap door shut, throwing the rusted bolt just as something heavy landed on it from above. The wood creaked but held. We stood in the maintenance tunnel, my flashlight the only illumination in the perfect darkness. My name is Rebecca Larson, and I am 34 years old. This happened in August 2024. The trail markers in the Five Ponds Wilderness area are supposed to be blue. That's what the map said, what the ranger at the visitor center told us, what all the hiking blogs confirmed. Blue markers, easy to spot against the dark bark of the hemlocks and pines. Blue meant safety. Blue meant we were on the right path. So when Emily pointed to a yellow marker nailed to a massive white pine ahead of us, something cold settled in my stomach. "That can't be right," I said, pulling out the map again. The paper was already damp from the intermittent drizzle that had followed us since we'd left the trailhead that morning. "There are no yellow trails in this part of the Adirondacks." Emily frowned, pushing a strand of dark hair behind her ear. We'd been best friends since college, had done weekend hikes together for years, but this was our first multi-day backcountry trek, a celebration of both turning 35 within months of each other. A chance to disconnect, to challenge ourselves on one of the most remote areas of the Adirondack Park. "Well, it's there, Beck." She shifted her pack and stepped closer to the tree. "Weird, though. Looks fresh." She was right. The yellow paint gleamed, unclouded by weather or time. I glanced back the way we'd come. The last blue marker was just visible through the trees, perhaps 50 yards back. "Let's check the GPS," I suggested, tugging my phone from my pocket. "No signal." "Of course." We were deep in the Five Ponds Wilderness, one of the most isolated regions in New York State. Cell reception had disappeared hours ago, but the GPS should still work. The blue dot indicating our position blinked uncertainly, then disappeared entirely. "That's odd," I muttered, tapping the screen. "Let me restart it." "We don't have time for that," Emily said, looking up at the darkening sky. "Weather report said rain might get heavy by evening. We need to reach the lean-to at Wolf Pond before it really opens up. But this trail isn't on the map. Maps get outdated. Maybe they're rerouting the trail and haven't updated everything yet." She shrugged and continued forward, past the yellow marker. "It's heading in the right direction anyway." I hesitated, unease prickling along my spine. 5 years as a park volunteer in college had taught me to respect wilderness, to prepare meticulously, to never deviate from plans without good reason. But Emily was already moving ahead, her red rain jacket a bright spot against the darkening forest. With one last glance at the blue marker behind us, I followed. The yellow trail was narrow, barely maintained. In places, we had to push through dense undergrowth, the wet leaves slapping against our legs. The ground grew softer, muddier, and twice I nearly lost my boot in the sucking earth. "You sure this is right?" I called ahead. Emily had pulled nearly 30 yards ahead of me. "This doesn't feel like a Park Service trail." "There's another marker," she replied, pointing. "Come on, the rain's getting worse." She was right about that. The light drizzle had intensified, now drumming steadily against the canopy above us. Fat drops found their way through the leaves, sliding down my neck despite my rain jacket's hood. I pushed forward, checking my watch. 4:17 p.m. We'd been hiking since 9 that morning, covering just over 7 miles according to our last GPS reading. Wolf Pond should be less than 2 miles away now, with its 3-sided shelter and fire pit. A chance to dry out, to eat something hot, to rest before tackling High Falls the next day, if we were still on the right path. Another yellow marker appeared, then another. They seemed fresher with each passing tree, the paint almost wet-looking in the gloomy light. The forest around us had changed too, I realized. The mixed hardwoods and pines of the earlier trail had given way to densely packed hemlocks and spruces, their branches creating a cathedral-like canopy that blocked even more light. The rain grew heavier, no longer just drops but sheets of water that reduced visibility to mere yards. The temperature seemed to drop with each step, the August warmth leaching away until I could see my breath forming clouds in the air. "Emily, wait up," I called, my voice swallowed by the drumming rain. She was just ahead, her red jacket now darkened to the color of dried blood by the water. She paused, turning back to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "We need to go back," I said when I reached her. "This isn't right." "It's too cold, and this trail—" "We can't go back now," she interrupted, gesturing around us. "Look at this. We'd be walking into the worst of the storm. Besides, I think we're close." "Close to what?" I demanded. "Wolf Pond should be east of us, but we've been heading northeast for at least a mile. That's if we're even where I think we are." Emily didn't answer immediately. She was staring past me, back the way we'd come. Her face had drained of color. "What is it?" I turned, following her gaze. At first I saw nothing but the gray curtain of rain and the dark trunks of the trees. Then movement caught my eye, something tall and thin slipping between 2 hemlocks perhaps 40 yards back. "Did you see that?" Emily whispered. I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. "Probably just a deer," I said, not believing it myself. Whatever I'd glimpsed had been walking upright. "Let's keep moving," Emily said, already turning away. "There's got to be shelter ahead." I followed, my earlier annoyance replaced by a creeping dread that settled like ice water in my veins. The forest had gone utterly silent around us. No birdsong, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush, nothing but the relentless patter of rain. The trail narrowed further, becoming little more than a game path threading between lichen-covered boulders and rotting logs. The yellow markers were fewer now, but we didn't need them. There was nowhere else to go but forward, the terrain on either side too dense or steep to navigate. We came to a small clearing where a massive oak had fallen, creating a tangle of branches and exposed roots. Emily stopped so suddenly I nearly ran into her back. "Beck," she said, her voice tight. "Look." Something was hanging from one of the broken branches of the fallen oak. At first, I thought it was just debris caught in the storm, maybe a plastic bag blown in from somewhere. But as we drew closer, I realized it was a small cloth pouch, deliberately tied to the branch with what looked like red thread. "Don't touch it," I warned as Emily reached for it. "I'm just looking," she replied, leaning in. "There's something inside. And look, there are symbols drawn on it." She was right. The rough cloth was marked with designs in what looked like dried blood or red ochre. Spirals, crosses, and what might have been crude stick figures. "That's not normal," I said, taking a step back. My skin crawled with goose flesh that had nothing to do with the cold. "People don't leave things like this in national parks." "We're not in a normal part of the park," Emily muttered, still studying the pouch. "The Five Ponds Wilderness is over 50,000 acres of basically untouched forest. There are places here people might not have visited in years." A sudden gust of wind shook the trees around us, sending a cascade of droplets down upon our heads. The pouch swung gently, almost like it was beckoning. "We need to find shelter," I insisted, tugging at Emily's sleeve. "Now." She nodded, finally stepping away from the strange object. As she turned, her boot caught on an exposed root, and she stumbled, catching herself on the oak's trunk. The movement shook the branch. The pouch dropped, hitting the wet ground with a soft thud that somehow seemed to echo through the clearing. Emily froze, looking at me with wide eyes. "It's fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Let's just go." We continued along the barely there trail, moving faster now despite the treacherous footing. The rain had penetrated everything: my supposedly waterproof jacket, my pants, my boots. Every step produced a squelching sound, and my socks were soaked through. The clearing with the fallen oak disappeared behind us, but I couldn't shake the feeling we'd disturbed something, crossed some boundary we weren't meant to cross. "There!" Emily's voice cut through my thoughts. She pointed ahead to where the dark shapes of buildings were just visible through the curtain of rain. Not the open-sided lean-to we'd expected to find at Wolf Pond, but what appeared to be a small cluster of cabins or sheds nestled among the trees. "What is this place?" I wondered aloud as we approached. "There aren't supposed to be any structures here except the designated shelters." "Who cares?" Emily replied, quickening her pace. "It's shelter. Maybe an old ranger station or hunting camp." The buildings resolved into 3 small cabins arranged in a rough semicircle around what must have once been a central fire pit, now a muddy depression filled with rainwater. They were crude structures, built from rough-hewn logs that had weathered to a uniform silver gray. No windows, just small, dark openings that might have once held glass. The roofs were covered in moss and lichen, sagging in places but apparently still intact enough to keep out the rain. We approached the largest of the 3, its door hanging askew on leather hinges. "Hello," Emily called, rapping her knuckles against the doorframe. "Anyone here?" Silence answered, broken only by the steady drumming of rain on the roof. "We should check inside," she said, already stepping over the threshold. I followed, blinking as my eyes adjusted to the gloom. The cabin was a single room, perhaps 15 feet square, with a dirt floor packed hard by years of use. A crude stone fireplace dominated one wall, its chimney a dark hole stretching up into the roof. A wooden platform that might have once been a bed frame stood in one corner, rotting blankets still laid across it. A rough-hewn table and single chair comprised the only other furniture. "This place is ancient," Emily whispered, running her fingers over the table's surface. Dust came away on her skin, but not as much as there should have been for a truly abandoned place. "But someone's been here relatively recently." I nodded, noticing the same thing. The fireplace held ashes that, while cold, didn't appear decades old. A lantern sat on the table, its glass clouded but intact. "Maybe hunters," I suggested, dropping my pack to the floor with a wet thud. "Though they're not supposed to be in this part of the preserve." "Or other hikers who got lost like us," Emily added, already busy examining the fireplace. "We lucked out. There's dry wood stacked here." While she worked on starting a fire, I explored the rest of the cabin. A small shelf held a few tin cans, their labels long since rotted away. Beside them lay an old book, its leather cover cracked and discolored. I picked it up carefully, surprised by its weight. The pages were filled with handwritten text in faded ink, the script cramped and difficult to decipher in the dim light. What I could make out seemed to be observations of the forest, notes on plant life, animal movements, weather patterns, interspersed with drawings similar to those we'd seen on the cloth pouch, spirals, crosses, stick figures in various poses. "Emily," I said, turning to show her my find. "Look at this." She had managed to get a small fire started, orange flames licking at the dry wood and casting dancing shadows across the cabin's interior. The warm light should have been comforting, but something about the way it illuminated the rough walls made them seem to shift and breathe. "What is it?" she asked, wiping her hands on her pants as she joined me at the table. I opened the book to one of the pages I'd been examining. "Does this look like English to you?" She squinted at the faded writing. "Some of it. This part looks like names, maybe? Peter. Something. Caroline. Webb. Hard to tell. But this stuff..." She pointed to a section of text that seemed to be written in another alphabet entirely, the characters sharp and angular. "That's definitely not English." A sudden gust of wind rattled the door in its frame, making both of us jump. The fire flickered, nearly dying before recovering, sending a plume of smoke up the chimney. "Let's just focus on getting dry," I suggested, closing the book and setting it aside. "We can figure out where we are in the morning when the storm passes." Emily nodded, already pulling her wet jacket off. "I'm soaked through. Need to hang these up to dry." We strung a length of paracord between two walls near the fire, creating a makeshift clothesline for our wettest outer garments. In dry base layers from our packs, we huddled near the flames, sharing the protein bars and dried fruit that were supposed to be tomorrow's lunch. Outside, the day was rapidly fading into twilight, the rain continuing its relentless percussion on the roof. Occasionally, gusts of wind would drive it sideways, sending drops hissing into the fire where they vaporized instantly. "Do you think the others made it to Wolf Pond?" Emily asked after a long silence. I'd almost forgotten about the rest of our hiking group, Diane and her husband Tom and their friend Kevin, whom I'd only met the day before. We'd planned to meet them at the lean-to, having taken different routes through the Five Ponds wilderness. "I hope so," I replied, thinking of the blue trail markers we'd abandoned. "At least they have Tom. He knows these trails better than any of us." Emily nodded, staring into the fire. "Do you remember that story he told last night, about the trapper who went missing in these woods back in the 1800s? I did remember. We'd gathered around the campfire at our first night's stop, and Tom, an amateur historian, had regaled us with local legends. "Jacob Emery," I said, recalling the name. "Disappeared in 1843, right? They found his cabin intact months later, food still on the table, but no sign of him. Except for his journal," Emily added, her voice dropping to a near whisper, where he wrote about being followed by something in the woods, something that wasn't human. A log shifted in the fire, sending up a shower of sparks. Outside, the wind had picked up, moaning through the trees with an almost human voice. "It's just a campfire story," I said, trying to sound more convinced than I felt. "People have been telling tales about these woods forever." "But that's the thing about old stories," Emily replied, her face half in shadow. "They persist because there's usually some grain of truth in them." Before I could respond, a sound cut through the drumming of the rain, a sharp crack, like a branch breaking, close to the cabin. We both froze, listening. For several heartbeats there was nothing but the rain and wind. Then it came again, closer this time, followed by what might have been footsteps, heavy and deliberate, circling the cabin. Emily's eyes met mine, wide with alarm. "Is that—" "An animal," I said quickly. "Has to be. Maybe a deer or even a moose." Another sound, this time at the door itself. A soft scraping, as if something was running fingers or claws down the rough wood. "Animals don't do that," Emily whispered. I stood, moving quietly to my pack and retrieving the small canister of bear spray I carried. Not much use against a person, but it made me feel better to have something in my hand. The scraping stopped. We waited, barely breathing, straining to hear over the pounding of blood in my ears. A minute passed. 2. Nothing but the storm. "Maybe whatever it was moved on," Emily suggested, her voice still hushed. I wasn't convinced, but I returned to the fire, clutching the bear spray like a talisman. "Let's keep watch tonight. Take shifts." She nodded, her face pale in the firelight. "I can take first watch. I'm too wired to sleep anyway." I must have dozed despite my intention to stay awake, the exhaustion of the day and the warmth of the fire conspiring against me. When I opened my eyes, the quality of light had changed. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, casting the cabin in a dull red glow. Emily sat where I'd left her, staring not at the fire, but at the door. "Everything okay?" I asked, my voice rough with sleep. She didn't answer immediately, and when she turned to me, her expression made my heart stutter. She looked haunted, her eyes too wide, her face drawn. "There's someone out there," she said, her voice barely audible. "They've been walking around the cabin for hours." I sat up, fully alert now. "Did they try to come in? Say anything?" She shook her head. "No, just walking. Stopping sometimes at the door or the walls. Listening, I think." A prickle of fear traced icy fingers down my spine. "Why didn't you wake me?" "You needed rest," she replied simply. "And I thought I was imagining it at first." I checked my watch, 3:22 a.m. Outside, the rain had lessened to a gentle patter, but the wind still moved through the trees, carrying with it sounds that might or might not have been footsteps. "Let me take over," I said, reaching for the book of matches to rekindle the fire. "You should try to sleep." Emily nodded, but made no move to lie down. Instead, she watched as I coaxed the embers back to life, adding small sticks until flames once again illuminated the cabin. "Beck," she said after a long moment, "I found something while you were asleep." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object, holding it out to me on her palm. It was a carved wooden figure, roughly the size and shape of a chess pawn, but with crude features etched into what would be its head, 2 deep gouges for eyes, a slash for a mouth. "Where did you find that?" I asked, not touching it. "Under the bed," she replied. "There are more of them. Dozens, all lined up against the wall like they're watching something." I stood, moving to the rotting platform that served as a bed. Kneeling, I peered underneath, retrieving my headlamp from my pocket. She was right. Lined up in a neat row against the wall were perhaps 20 wooden figures, identical to the one Emily held. They faced inward, toward the center of the room, their blank faces somehow expectant, as if waiting for something to happen. "What the hell?" I breathed. backing away. Who would do this? Emily didn't answer, still staring at the figure in her hand. There's something written on the bottom of each one, she said, turning it over. A name. I took the figure from her, examining the base. Carved into the wood in tiny, precise letters was a name, Caroline Webb, the same name we'd seen in the journal. Put it back, I said, handing the figure to Emily with suddenly trembling fingers. Put it back, exactly where you found it. She nodded, kneeling to return the figure to its place in the row. As she was about to set it down, a sound from outside stopped her. A clear, unmistakable sound that turned my blood to ice. Someone was singing. The voice was high and sweet, childlike but not a child's, singing words I couldn't quite make out. It moved around the cabin, never staying in one place, circling as the footsteps had done earlier. Emily stood, the wooden figure still clutched in her hand, her face drained of all color. Do you hear that? I nodded, moving closer to her, away from the door. The singing stopped, replaced by soft tapping on the cabin walls. Tap, 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 moving methodically around the perimeter, as if someone was testing for weak spots. Then silence, absolute and heavy, and the door latch lifted slowly, the worn metal scraping against wood with a sound like nails on a chalkboard. The door itself began to swing inward, letting in a draft of cold air that made the fire sputter and flare. Emily grabbed my arm, her fingers digging painfully into my flesh. Together, we watched as the door opened fully, revealing nothing but darkness and the gentle fall of rain. No one entered. No one was visible in the doorway. "Hello," I called, my voice embarrassingly thin. "Is someone there?" The fire leapt suddenly, as if caught in a strong gust, though the air in the cabin remained eerily still. In that brief flare of light, I thought I saw something. A figure standing just beyond the threshold, tall and impossibly thin, its proportions all wrong. But when the flames settled, there was nothing there. Emily's grip on my arm tightened further. "Close the door," she whispered urgently. "Close it now." I took a step forward, then another, fighting against every instinct that screamed at me to retreat, to hide, to run. When I reached the door, I grasped the edge and began to pull it closed, trying not to think about what my hand might encounter on the other side. The door swung shut without resistance. I secured the latch, then backed away, half expecting it to burst open again. It remained closed. "What was that?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before I could answer, a new sound rose from outside. Not singing this time, but weeping. Soft at first, then building to heart-wrenching sobs that seemed to come from directly behind the door. It was the crying of a child, lost and afraid. "Don't," Emily warned as I took an involuntary step toward the door. "It's not real." "How do you know?" I asked, though I made no further move to open the door. "What if someone's actually out there? A lost hiker, a kid who wandered away from a campsite?" Emily shook her head vehemently. "In this part of the forest? Miles from any trail? In the middle of the night? Think, Beck." She was right, of course. The rational part of my brain knew no child would be wandering these woods alone, especially not in a storm. But the crying sounded so genuine, so desperate, that it was hard to ignore. "Stay away from the door," Emily said, tugging me back toward the fire. "Whatever's out there, it wants us to open up." The weeping continued, occasionally interrupted by what sounded like words, though I couldn't make them out. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, it began to fade, moving away from the cabin, deeper into the forest until we could no longer hear it at all. We stood in silence, listening to the rain and our own ragged breathing. "What just happened?" I finally asked, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet cabin. Emily shook her head, her face pale in the firelight. "I don't know, but I think we should leave as soon as it's light." I nodded, though the thought of going back out into those woods filled me with dread. "We need to find the main trail, get back to the ranger station." Agreed, Emily said, moving to check that our clothes were dry. We can be ready to move at first light. We spent the remaining hours of darkness in a state of hypervigilance, jumping at every creak of the old cabin, every gust of wind that rattled the door. The wooden figures under the bed seemed to watch us with their empty carved eyes, silent witnesses to our fear. As gray light finally began to filter through the cabin's single small window, we packed our things with urgent efficiency, desperate to be away from this place before full daylight revealed whatever might be lurking in the woods. "Ready?" Emily asked, shouldering her pack. I nodded, taking one last look around the cabin. My gaze fell on the book we'd found, still lying on the table where I'd left it. After a moment's hesitation, I picked it up and stuffed it into my pack. Perhaps it contained information that could explain what we'd experienced, or at least provide some clue as to where we really were. Outside, the forest was wrapped in fog, the trees looming as indistinct shadows in the mist. The rain had stopped, but water still dripped from every leaf and branch, creating a constant background patter. "Which way?" Emily asked, her voice hushed as if afraid to disturb the silent woods. I pulled out my compass, relieved when the needle steadied, pointing north. "If we head southeast, we should eventually hit one of the main trails," I said, "or at least find Woods Pond. There's a ranger outpost there." We set off, picking our way carefully through the underbrush. There was no path leading away from the cabins, no sign that anyone had come or gone recently. The ground was covered in a thick layer of pine needles and fallen leaves, soaked through by the rain but undisturbed by footprints, human or otherwise. The fog clung stubbornly to the forest as we walked, never thinning, sometimes thickening until visibility was reduced to just a few yards ahead. Sounds were muffled, disorienting. More than once I would have sworn I heard footsteps paralleling our course, just out of sight in the mist. But when we stopped to listen, there was only silence. After what felt like hours of walking, Emily suddenly stopped, holding up a hand. "Do you see that?" she asked, pointing ahead. At first, I saw nothing but trees and fog. Then a shape resolved itself, a dark, vertical line against the gray background. As we drew closer, I realized it was a trail marker nailed to a tree, a yellow trail marker. "No," I said, shaking my head. "That can't be right. We've been walking southeast all morning." Emily approached the marker, examining it closely. "It's the same as yesterday. Same shade of yellow, same fresh paint." She was right. It looked identical to the markers that had led us off the main trail the day before. "This doesn't make sense," I said, checking my compass again. The needle pointed steadily north, confirming that we'd been traveling in the direction I thought. "We can't be back on the same trail." "Unless it circles around," Emily suggested, though she sounded unconvinced. "A trail that isn't on any map. That just happens to lead to an abandoned cabin with creepy wooden figures and then loops back to itself." I shook my head. "No, something else is going on here." Emily didn't argue. She stared at the yellow marker as if it might suddenly speak and explain everything. "Let's keep going," I finally said, "but not following these markers. We'll stick to our compass heading." We continued southeast, deliberately moving away from the direction the yellow marker seemed to indicate. The fog remained thick around us, but I was certain we were making progress, putting distance between ourselves and whatever strange phenomena we'd encountered. That certainty lasted until we pushed through a particularly dense patch of undergrowth and found ourselves in a small clearing with a fallen oak at its center. The same fallen oak from yesterday, with a cloth pouch dangling from one of its broken branches. "No," Emily whispered, stopping so abruptly I nearly ran into her. "No, that's not possible." But it was undeniably the same tree, the same clearing. Even the mud around the base of the trunk still bore the imprint of Emily's boot from where she'd stumbled the day before. "We've been walking for hours," I said, panic rising in my throat. "In a straight line. How could we end up back here?" Emily shook her head, her face a mask of confusion and fear. "I don't know. Maybe we got turned around in the fog." "No," I insisted, holding up my compass. We've been heading southeast the whole time. This shouldn't be possible." We stood in silence, the implication of our situation settling over us like the damp fog. Either we were somehow walking in circles despite following a straight compass heading, or the forest itself was changing around us, leading us back to where we'd started. Neither option seemed possible. Both were terrifying. "We need help," Emily said finally, pulling out her phone. "I know there's no signal, but maybe we can at least get a GPS reading, figure out exactly where we are." She tapped at the screen, her movements growing increasingly frantic. "It's dead," she announced, looking up with wide eyes. "It was at 60% this morning." I checked my own phone, finding the same result. Mine too, drained completely. A cold dread settled in the pit of my stomach. Electronic devices failing, compasses apparently lying, trails that led nowhere and everywhere at once. These were the elements of every horror story ever told about people lost in the wilderness. "The cabin," Emily said suddenly. "We need to go back to the cabin." "What? Why would we go back there?" "Because it's shelter," she replied, her voice taking on an edge of desperation. "Because we know where it is. Because wandering around out here is obviously getting us nowhere." I wanted to argue, to insist that returning to that place was the last thing we should do. But she was right about one thing. We were lost, going in circles, and the fog showed no signs of lifting. At least the cabin offered protection from the elements while we figured out our next move. "Fine," I conceded, "but we stay only long enough to rest and come up with a better plan." Emily nodded, already turning back the way we'd come. As we retraced our steps, I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching us, herding us, deliberately guiding us back to the cabin with its row of wooden figures and whatever presence had moved outside its walls in the night. The cluster of cabins emerged from the fog exactly as we'd left them, the doors still closed, no sign that anything or anyone had visited in our absence. Yet something felt different, an almost imperceptible change in the atmosphere that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. "Something's not right," I murmured as we approached the main cabin. Emily paused, scanning the clearing. "It looks the same to me." "Not how it looks," I replied, struggling to articulate the sense of wrongness that pervaded the air. "How it feels, like we're being watched." She didn't dismiss my concerns, which was somehow more frightening than if she had. Instead, she nodded slowly, her eyes darting to the dark windows of the smaller cabins, the spaces between trees, the shadows beneath the sagging porch. "Let's just get inside," she said, moving toward the door of the main cabin. Something stopped me from following immediately. An instinct, a premonition, I couldn't say. But as Emily reached for the door latch, I called out, "Wait!" She froze, hand outstretched. "Let me check something first," I said, moving cautiously to the window. The glass was long gone, the opening covered with what appeared to be a thin piece of animal hide that allowed a diffuse light to enter but obscured any view of the interior. Carefully, I lifted one corner of the hide and peered inside. The cabin appeared much as we'd left it. The remains of our fire cold in the hearth, our makeshift clothesline still strung between the walls. But there was one significant difference. The wooden figures that had been lined up beneath the bed were now arranged in a circle in the center of the dirt floor. "Emily," I whispered, beckoning her over. "Look." She joined me at the window, sucking in a sharp breath when she saw what I was showing her. "We didn't do that," she said, stating the obvious. "No," I agreed. "Someone's been in there since we left." Or something, my mind added unbidden. "Maybe it was an animal," Emily suggested, though her tone indicated she didn't believe it herself. "A raccoon or something, disturbing things." An animal that carefully arranged wooden figures in a perfect circle? I shook my head. No. Someone was in there. Might still be in there. We backed away from the window, moving to the edge of the clearing where we could watch the cabin from a relatively safe distance. "What do we do now?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper despite the fact that we were well out of earshot of anyone who might be inside. I had no good answer. The fog remained thick around us, limiting visibility to perhaps 50 yards in any direction. Without working phones or a reliable compass, striking out into the forest again seemed foolhardy at best, potentially fatal at worst. But staying here with clear evidence that we weren't alone seemed equally dangerous. We check the other cabins. I decided finally, if they're empty, we can use one of them to rest and plan our next move. Emily nodded, though her expression suggested she wasn't any more enthusiastic about this plan than I was. We approached the smaller cabins cautiously, our footsteps muffled by the carpet of wet leaves underfoot. The first was little more than a storage shed, its interior stacked with firewood, animal traps, and what looked like hand tools crusted with rust and dirt. The second cabin was more promising, similar in construction to the main building but smaller, containing only a crude pallet that might serve as a bed and a three-legged stool. No fireplace, but it appeared dry and, most importantly, empty of both people and unsettling wooden figures. "This will do," I said, dropping my pack on the dirt floor. "Just until the fog lifts." Emily nodded, setting her own pack down. "I'll see if I can use some of that firewood from the shed to block the door." While she fetched the wood, I examined our temporary shelter more closely. Unlike the main cabin, this one had symbols carved directly into the log walls, similar to those we'd seen on the cloth pouch, but larger, more elaborate. Spirals that seemed to turn endlessly inward, stick figures with too many limbs, and what looked like maps or diagrams of the surrounding forest, with the cabin clearing marked by a 5-pointed star. "Got enough to barricade the door," Emily announced, returning with an armload of split logs. "We can wedge these under the latch and—" She stopped, noticing the carvings for the first time. "Were those there before?" "I didn't see them," I admitted, "but it was too dark when we first looked in." Emily set the wood down, moving closer to one of the carvings, a particularly intricate spiral with what appeared to be writing along its curves. "This is the same script from the journal," she said, running her fingers over the marks. "Not English, not any language I recognize." "Don't touch it," I warned, though it was too late. She pulled her hand back, looking at me with a mixture of defiance and fear. "We can't just ignore what's happening. Beck, we need to figure out where we are, what this place is." "I know," I sighed, sinking down onto the dirt floor. "But I don't think the answers are carved into these walls. We need to get out of here, find help." Emily nodded, turning her attention to barricading the door. Using the logs and some rope from her pack, she constructed a crude but effective barrier that would at least slow down anyone, or anything, trying to enter. "That should hold," she said, testing her work with a firm push. "Now, we just need to wait out the fog." But as the hours passed, the fog showed no signs of dissipating. If anything, it seemed to thicken, pressing against the small window like something alive, seeking entry. The light filtering through gradually diminished until it was difficult to see across the small room, let alone outside. We spoke little, conserving our energy and what remained of our food, a few protein bars, some nuts, beef jerky. The water in our bottles was running low, too. We'd planned to refill at Wolf Pond, a plan that now seemed laughably optimistic. As dusk approached, or what I assumed was dusk, given the deepening darkness, Emily broke our long silence. "I've been thinking about the wooden figures," she said, her voice hushed despite the fact that we were alone. "The ones in the main cabin." "What about them?" I asked, though I'd been deliberately trying not to think about those unsettling objects. "They had names carved on them, names of real people maybe, like Caroline Webb from the journal." She paused, chewing her lip. "What if they represent people who've been here before? People who never left?" A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. "You think there's some kind of trophies?" Emily shrugged, her features barely visible in the gathering gloom. "Or warnings? Or a record-keeping system? I don't know, but I think they mean something to whoever, or whatever, brought us here." "Nothing brought us here," I said, more sharply than I intended. "We followed a trail that wasn't on our map and got lost. That's all. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. The yellow markers that appeared where no trail should be, the cabin existing where no structures were recorded, the strange phenomena we'd experienced, none of it could be explained by simple misadventure. "You don't really believe that," Emily said quietly. I didn't answer. The truth was, I was terrified of admitting even to myself that what was happening might be supernatural, might be beyond our understanding or control. Because if I accepted that, I would have to accept that we might never find our way out. A sudden sound from outside interrupted my thoughts. A sharp crack, like a branch breaking beneath a heavy weight. We froze, listening. For several long moments, there was only silence. Then it came again, closer this time, followed by another and another. Deliberate footsteps moving toward our cabin. Emily extinguished our small flashlight, plunging us into near-total darkness. We huddled together in the corner farthest from the door, barely breathing. The footsteps stopped directly outside. Something scraped against the wooden door, not the desperate scratching from the previous night, but a careful, deliberate exploration of the barrier. Then a voice spoke, low and rough, its words unintelligible but its tone unmistakably threatening. "Is that a person?" Emily whispered, her breath warm against my ear. Before I could answer, a heavy weight slammed against the door, making the whole cabin shudder. The barricade held, but barely. Another impact followed, stronger than the first, and I heard the wood begin to splinter. "The window," I hissed, tugging Emily toward the small opening on the opposite wall. "We have to go now." She needed no further urging. Together, we scrambled toward the window, tearing away the animal hide covering. The opening was small, barely large enough to squeeze through, but we had no choice. "You first," Emily insisted, boosting me up. I wriggled through the tight space, bark scraping painfully against my sides, and tumbled to the ground outside. Emily followed, her movements more fluid than mine, landing beside me as another crash shook the cabin. Without waiting to see if the door would hold, we ran, plunging into the fog-shrouded forest with no direction in mind except away. The underbrush tore at our clothes, low branches whipped our faces, but we didn't slow, driven by pure animal panic. Behind us, a roar of rage echoed through the trees, a sound no human throat could produce. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs trembled, finally collapsing behind a massive fallen tree, its trunk wide enough to conceal us from immediate view. Gasping for breath, we strained to hear any sound of pursuit, but there was only the soft drip of water from the trees and our own thundering heartbeats. "What was that?" Emily managed between ragged breaths. I shook my head, unable or unwilling to put a name to the presence that had nearly broken down our door. "Don't know. Don't want to know." "Did you see it?" she asked. "No. Too dark." She nodded, relief evident in her expression. "Me neither." We huddled behind the fallen tree, the fog curling around us like ghostly fingers as full night descended on the forest. Without shelter, without fire, the temperature dropped rapidly, seeping through our clothes and into our bones. "We can't stay here," Emily said finally, her teeth chattering. "We'll freeze." She was right. Already I could feel the dangerous lethargy of hypothermia beginning to set in, the temptation to close my eyes and drift away growing stronger with each passing minute. "We need to keep moving," I agreed, struggling to my feet. "But where? We don't even know which direction is out anymore." Emily stood, rubbing her arms vigorously to stimulate circulation. "I've been thinking about that. The yellow markers led us here, right? But they started somewhere. If we can find where they connect to the main trail, we can follow the blue markers back to civilization." It was a long shot, but it was the only plan we had. With no other options, we set off through the dark forest, moving as quietly as possible, constantly alert for any sound that might indicate pursuit. The fog made navigation nearly impossible, reducing visibility to just a few feet in any direction. We moved from tree to tree, keeping close to avoid becoming separated. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the creak of branches, the occasional hoot of an owl, sent our hearts racing. After what felt like hours of wandering, Emily suddenly stopped, gripping my arm. "Look," she whispered, pointing ahead. At first, I saw nothing through the swirling mist. Then a patch of light appeared, warm and yellow against the darkness. "Is that fire?" I asked, hope rising despite my caution. "I think so," Emily replied. "A campfire, maybe. Other hikers." The thought of finding help, of other human beings in this seemingly endless wilderness, was almost overwhelming. But a warning voice in the back of my mind urged caution. "We should approach carefully," I said. "Make sure it's actually people before we reveal ourselves." Emily nodded, and together we crept toward the light, moving silently through the underbrush. As we drew closer, the source became clear. Not a campfire, but lanterns hanging from the porch of a cabin. The main cabin. The one we'd fled hours ago. "No," Emily moaned, the sound escaping before she could stop it. "That's not possible. We've been walking away from the cabins this whole time." I felt the same despair threatening to overwhelm me. No matter which direction we traveled, the forest somehow brought us back to this place, this clearing with its ominous structures and unseen watcher. But something was different this time. The door of the main cabin stood open, light spilling out onto the wet ground. And silhouetted in that doorway was a figure, tall, impossibly thin, its proportions wrong in ways I couldn't quite define. We froze, half hidden by the trees at the edge of the clearing. The figure in the doorway didn't move, didn't appear to breathe. It simply waited, head cocked slightly as if listening. "What do we do?" Emily whispered, her voice barely audible even to me. Before I could answer, the figure in the doorway turned, facing directly toward our hiding place despite the fact that we'd made no sound. For an endless moment, it stared, though I could discern no eyes in the shadowed face. Then it raised one elongated arm and beckoned. "Run!" I hissed, tugging Emily back into the deeper shadows of the forest. "Now!" We fled, crashing through underbrush with no attempt at stealth, driven by blind panic. Behind us, a sound rose, that same sweet, childlike singing we'd heard the night before, but louder now, more insistent, seeming to come from all directions at once. Emily stumbled, crying out as she fell. I turned back, helping her to her feet, and in that moment caught a glimpse of something moving through the trees behind us. A tall, stick-thin silhouette, gliding rather than walking, covering ground with unnatural speed. "It's following us," I gasped, pulling Emily forward. "We have to keep moving." But she resisted, pointing ahead. "Look!" Through the fog, another light appeared. Steady, bluish-white, artificial. A flashlight. "Hello?" a man's voice called. "Is someone there?" For a moment I hesitated, afraid of another trick, another loop bringing us back to the cabins. But the voice came again, closer now. "Rebecca? Emily? Is that you?" "Tom!" Emily shouted, recognizing the voice of our fellow hiker. "Tom, we're here!" We pushed toward the light, hope giving us a final burst of energy. The beam of the flashlight cut through the fog, illuminating two figures approaching. Tom and Diane, their faces creased with concern. "Jesus Christ," Tom said as we stumbled into the circle of light. "We've been looking for you two for hours. What happened? Why aren't you at Wolf Pond?" "We got lost," I managed, fighting the urge to collapse in relief. "Followed the wrong trail." Tom frowned, shining his light past us into the forest. "What trail? This is completely off any marked path." I turned, following his gaze, half expecting to see the thin figure still pursuing us. But there was nothing visible through the fog, just the endless trees. "Where's Kevin?" Emily asked suddenly, noticing their third companion was missing. A shadow passed over Tom's face. "We don't know. He went to gather firewood last night and never came back. We've been searching for him since dawn." He paused, studying our faces. "Did you see him?" out here somewhere?" I exchanged a glance with Emily, a chill running through me that had nothing to do with the cold. "No," I said. "No sign of him." Tom nodded, obviously disappointed but not surprised. "Come on then. We've got a camp set up near the main trail. You two look like you could use some food and rest." As we followed Tom and Diane through the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched, that something was following just beyond the reach of the flashlight's beam. Several times, I thought I caught a flicker of movement from the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, there was only fog and darkness. The relief, when we finally reached their camp, a proper tent with a small fire burning in a cleared space, was overwhelming. Diane wrapped us in emergency blankets while Tom prepared hot drinks, both of them asking questions we were too exhausted to fully answer. Later, as Emily slept, I sat by the fire with Tom, telling him an abbreviated version of what had happened: the yellow markers, the cabins, the strange phenomena we'd experienced. I left out the wooden figures, the weeping child, the thin figure that had pursued us. Even to myself, those details sounded too fantastical, too terrifying to be believed. Tom listened in silence, his weathered face grave in the firelight. "Yellow markers," he repeated when I'd finished. "You're sure about that?" I nodded. "Bright yellow, fresh paint, but they weren't on any map, and they led us in circles." Tom was quiet for a long moment, poking at the fire with a stick. "There's an old story about these woods," he said finally, his voice low, "about a trapper named Jacob Emery who disappeared in the 1840s. "You told us," I said, "last night, at the campfire." "Not everything," Tom replied, glancing toward the sleeping forms of Diane and Emily. "Not the part about the markers." A chill ran through me despite the fire's warmth. "What markers?" According to the legend, Emery started marking trees with yellow paint in the weeks before he vanished. Said something was living in the woods, something that wasn't human, something that could change the paths, make a man walk in circles until he couldn't find his way out. Tom's voice had dropped to almost a whisper. The yellow marks were supposed to lead to its home, deep in the forest where no trails go. I stared at him, my mouth suddenly dry. "You don't really believe that?" Tom shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "I've been coming to these woods for 30 years. Never saw a yellow trail marker before. Never heard of anyone else seeing them either." He paused, adding another stick to the fire. "But every few years, hikers go missing in the Five Ponds Wilderness. Most are never found." "Like Kevin," I said softly. Tom nodded, his expression grim. "Like Kevin." We lapsed into silence, the fire crackling between us, each lost in our own thoughts. I wanted to dismiss Tom's story as just that, a story, a local legend to frighten tourists and explain the occasional disappearance in a vast wilderness where getting lost was all too easy. But I couldn't forget what we'd seen, what had pursued us through the fog. Couldn't forget the wooden figures with their carved names lined up beneath the bed, then arranged in a circle as if in preparation for some ritual. One of those figures had a name I recognized from the journal. Caroline Webb, a name from a century and a half ago. How many other figures were there? How many names? Would there soon be 2 more, bearing our names? Would they join the circle in that cabin, waiting for the next lost hikers to follow yellow markers into the fog? I didn't know, didn't want to know. What I did know was that tomorrow, we would leave this place. We would follow Tom and Diane back to the ranger station, back to civilization, back to a world where forests had edges and trails had ends, and things that moved in the fog were just deer or raccoons or the product of frightened imaginations. And I knew that I would never return to the Five Ponds Wilderness. Never again venture into any place where the trees grew too thick, where fog could rise without warning, where yellow markers might appear on trees that shouldn't be marked. As the fire burned low and the night deepened around our small circle of light, I found myself straining to hear through the ambient sounds of the forest. The rustle of leaves, the distant call of a night bird, the soft breathing of my sleeping companions, listening for footsteps, for singing, for the weeping of a child that was not a child at all, hoping with every fiber of my being that nothing would answer. But part of me knew better. Part of me knew that something had followed us out of that unnatural fog, something that wouldn't easily relinquish its claim on us, something patient that could wait and watch, biding its time until we were alone again, until we were vulnerable, something that marked its trees in yellow, that carved names into wooden figures, that sang with a child's voice in the darkness, something still out there in the woods, waiting. And as I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, I thought I heard, just at the edge of hearing, so faint it might have been imagination, the sweet, high melody of a wordless song, winding through the trees like mist, drawing ever closer to our camp. I'm still waiting to hear if they ever found Kevin. Part of me hopes they did. But a deeper part, the part that remembers those wooden figures lined up beneath the bed, knows the truth. He's still there, in those woods. His name carved into wood, his essence somehow captured or consumed by whatever dwells among those ancient trees. And sometimes, when fog rolls in off the lake near my home, I find myself listening for singing, for weeping, for the sound of footsteps circling in the mist. Waiting for yellow markers to appear on the trees outside my window, beckoning me back to the Five Ponds wilderness, to the cabin with its circle of wooden figures, to the thin creature that moves like mist through the endless forest. Waiting for me to return to the place that, in some fundamental way, I never truly left. My name is Elijah Morris, and I am 34 years old. This happened in October 2024. The cold snap had come early to the Adirondacks that year. As I stood at the trailhead of the Dix Mountain Wilderness area, I watched my breath form clouds in the crisp morning air. The parking lot was empty except for my battered Subaru. Not surprising for a Thursday in late October, most hikers with any sense were home preparing for winter, but I'd never been accused of having sense, at least not since Mara died. I shouldered my pack, feeling the familiar weight settle against my spine. 60 pounds of gear, tent, sleeping bag rated for sub-zero temperatures, stove, water filter, first aid kit, 4 days of food, and enough layers to survive whatever the mountains threw at me. Plus the small metal urn nestled between my spare socks. This trip wasn't about leisure. It was about saying goodbye. Mara and I had planned to hike the entire Dix Range together. 5 peaks, all over 4,000 feet, interconnected by rough, unmarked herd paths. We'd trained for months, plotting routes, breaking in new boots, spending weekends on smaller mountains. But then the headaches started. 6 weeks later, she was gone. Brain tumor. Inoperable. Her last words to me had been, "Promise you'll take me there anyway." So here I was, fulfilling that promise. I'd scatter her ashes from the summit of Dix Mountain, the highest peak in the range at 4,857 feet. I checked my watch, 8:17 a.m. If I maintained a steady pace, I could make it to the Bouquet Lean-to Shelter before nightfall. Tomorrow, I'd summit Dix, say my goodbyes, then begin the trek out. The trail started off gently enough, a worn dirt path cutting through a forest of maple, birch, and pine. The leaves had passed their peak color weeks ago. Now they crunched beneath my boots in various shades of brown. The trees grew sparser as I climbed, their trunks more twisted, the terrain rougher. By noon, the well-maintained trail had given way to something wilder. I checked my map at an unmarked junction. Left would take me toward the Bouquet River, where I'd find the lean-to. The problem was that both paths looked equally used, or perhaps equally unused. I pulled out my phone to check the GPS app I downloaded with the trail maps. No signal. Not surprising this deep in the wilderness. I remembered Mara teasing me about my reliance on technology. "What happens when the batteries die?" she'd ask. "That's why I carry a compass and a paper map. City boy." I had both those things too, but the map didn't show this particular junction. After a moment's hesitation, I took the left fork, reasoning that it headed downhill, and the lean-to was near the river in the valley. The trail descended steeply. Too steeply. After half an hour, I began to doubt my choice. According to the map, I should have reached the river by now. I paused, listening for the sound of running water, but heard only the whisper of wind through bare branches and the occasional call of a raven. I was about to turn back when I spotted something through the trees. A flash of blue. A trail marker. I pushed forward, shoving through a tangle of underbrush, and found myself standing before a small cabin. Not the three-sided lean-to I'd expected, but a full structure with walls, a door, and a metal chimney pipe poking through the roof. It wasn't on my map. A hand-carved wooden sign hung above the door. The Hollows. I approached cautiously. The cabin looked well-maintained but had an undeniable air of abandonment. No smoke from the chimney, no tracks in the dirt around it, no sound from within. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded unnaturally loud in the stillness. "Anyone home?" Nothing but silence answered me. I should have turned around right then. Retraced my steps, found the correct trail, but the afternoon was wearing on, and the temperature was dropping faster than I'd anticipated. Dark clouds were gathering above the tree line. My weather app had predicted clear skies, but mountain weather was notoriously unpredictable. I tried the door. It swung open with a low creak. The interior was small but tidy. A stone fireplace dominated one wall with a stack of split logs beside it. A rough wooden table with 2 chairs sat in the center. A narrow bed with a faded quilt occupied the far corner. No personal belongings visible. No signs of recent habitation. It looked like one of the backcountry cabins maintained by the Department of Environmental Conservation, though none were marked in this area on my map. Perhaps it was old, forgotten, or simply missing from the latest trail guides. Either way, it offered shelter, and the darkening sky promised rain. I decided to stay. I unloaded my pack and set about making the cabin habitable for the night. I swept the floor with a broom I found in the corner, laid out my sleeping bag on the bed. I wasn't brave enough to use the ancient quilt, and got a fire going in the fireplace. As flames began to lick at the dry logs, a sense of comfort spread through the single room. I prepared a simple dinner of dehydrated beef stew on my camp stove, though I could have used the cast-iron pot hanging beside the fireplace. Something about using the cabin's equipment felt too intimate, too presumptuous. Night fell quickly, as it does in the mountains in autumn. The rain I'd anticipated began to patter against the cabin's roof, gentle at first, then strengthening to a steady drumbeat. Wind whistled through small gaps in the walls. I was grateful for the solid roof over my head. I sat at the table, my headlamp illuminating the pages of my journal as I recorded the day's journey. I wrote about finding the cabin, about my plans to reach Dick's Mountain tomorrow, about my final duty to Mara. Writing to her had become a habit in the months since her death, a one-sided conversation that somehow kept her close. "Remember how you always wanted to find a haunted cabin in the woods?" I wrote. "Well, I think I did it for you. Though so far, no ghosts." A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, heart racing, but the cabin was empty save for the dancing shadows cast by the fire. Just the old wood settling, I told myself. These mountains experienced extreme temperature changes from day to night. The structure was simply contracting in the cold. I returned to my journal, but found I couldn't concentrate. Despite the fire, a chill had crept into the cabin. I checked my watch, 9:43 p.m. Early by my standards, but after a day of hiking with a heavy pack, my body craved rest. I closed my journal and prepared for bed, brushing my teeth with water from my bottle. No plumbing in the cabin, of course, and changing into clean thermal layers to sleep in. I banked the fire so it would provide heat through the night without risk of sparks escaping, and slipped into my sleeping bag. Sleep came quickly, but it wasn't restful. I dreamed of walking through an endless forest, following Mara. She stayed just ahead of me, always visible but never reachable. She didn't look back, didn't speak, just walked steadily forward, her dark hair swinging with each step. I called to her, but my voice made no sound. The forest grew darker, the trees closer together, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. I woke with a gasp, drenched in sweat despite the cold. The fire had died to embers, casting the cabin in deep shadow. My watch read 3:17 a.m. Something had woken me. A sound. I lay perfectly still, straining to hear above the drumming of rain on the roof. There, a scraping noise, like nails dragging slowly across wood. It seemed to be coming from the door. An animal, I reasoned. A raccoon or perhaps a bear, drawn by the scent of my food. I'd hung my food bag from a rafter, standard practice in bear country, but the creature wouldn't know that. The scratching continued, rhythmic and purposeful. Not the random pawing of an animal, more like knocking. 3 slow scrapes, pause, 3 more, pause. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly thin. The scratching stopped immediately. I fumbled for my headlamp, clicked it on, and aimed the beam at the door. Nothing unusual, just weathered wood, firmly closed as I'd left it. I was about to dismiss the sound as part of a dream when I noticed something that turned my blood to ice. On the inside of the door, at about the height where one might knock, were 3 fresh grooves in the wood. Long, thin scrapes that hadn't been there when I'd entered. Someone, or something, had been trying to get in, from the inside. I scrambled out of my sleeping bag, fully awake now. The cabin was empty. Nowhere to hide in the simple one-room structure. I checked the door, finding it still latched. The single window was shut tight against the rain. A branch, I told myself. A tree branch blown by the wind had scraped against the door. The marks inside. Well, they must have been there all along, and I simply hadn't noticed them in the fading light of evening. But even as I formed these rational explanations, a deeper part of me knew they were lies. I wouldn't be sleeping anymore that night. I stoked the fire back to life, adding log after log until the flames roared in the stone fireplace. Light and heat flooded the cabin, pushing back the shadows. I sat at the table, my back to the wall, facing the door. I pulled out my phone again, hoping against hope for a signal. Nothing. I was alone, miles from the nearest human, in an unknown cabin with something that scratched at doors from impossible directions. For the first time, I seriously considered abandoning my mission. At first light, I could pack up and hike back to my car, return to civilization, to safety. Mara would understand. No, she wouldn't. A voice in my head corrected. Mara had been fearless. Pragmatic, yes. She took appropriate precautions in the wilderness, but never one to run from the unknown. She would have been fascinated by the mystery of the cabin, would have wanted to investigate further. As if in response to my thoughts, I heard her voice, as clear as if she were sitting beside me. "Don't be such a scaredy cat, Eli. Since when do you believe in ghost stories?" I whipped my head around, but of course, she wasn't there. Just my exhausted mind playing tricks, dredging up memories of her teasing voice. The longest hours of my life crawled by as I waited for dawn. Outside, the rain had stopped, but a thick fog had settled in its place, pressing against the window like a living thing. Occasionally, I heard noises from the forest, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of some nocturnal creature in the underbrush. Normal sounds that somehow seemed ominous in my state of heightened alertness. Finally, the darkness began to thin. Not the golden light of a clear dawn, but the gray lifelessness of a foggy morning. I packed quickly, eager to be away from the cabin. As I shouldered my backpack, I glanced one last time at the 3 scratches on the door. In the pale morning light, they looked deeper than they had by the beam of my headlamp, and beside them, previously hidden in shadow, was a crude carving, a stick figure with elongated limbs and no face. I practically ran from the cabin, not bothering to close the door behind me. The fog was dense, limiting visibility to about 20 feet in all directions. I pulled out my compass, determined to head east, back toward the trail I'd strayed from, but the needle spun uselessly, rotating in a complete circle before settling in a different direction each time. Electronic interference could affect a compass, but out here, there were no power lines, no radio towers, nothing but wilderness for miles. I'd have to rely on my memory and the rising sun to orient myself, except the fog was so thick I couldn't tell where the sun was. A diffuse glow permeated everything, shadowless and directionless. I chose the path that I thought led back up the slope I'd descended. The ground was slick with rainwater and fallen leaves, making the climb treacherous. After 20 minutes of hard hiking, I should have reached the junction where I'd made my wrong turn. Instead, I found myself in an unfamiliar stretch of forest. The trees here were different. Older, massive trunks twisted into grotesque shapes. Their branches intertwined overhead, creating a canopy that further dimmed the meager light. The ground was covered not in the typical forest understory, but in a carpet of pale mushrooms, their caps glistening with moisture. I stopped, fighting rising panic. I was lost. The realization hit me with physical force, a tightness in my chest that made it hard to breathe. Stay calm, I told myself. Think logically. I was still in the Adirondack Park, one of the most visited wilderness areas in the northeastern United States. If I picked a direction and walked long enough, I'd eventually hit a trail, a road, or a town. I decided to climb. Higher ground would give me a better vantage point, and if I could get above the fog, I might be able to spot a landmark. As I ascended, the forest grew quieter. The typical sounds of a woodland morning, birdsong, squirrels chattering, the buzz of insects, were conspicuously absent. Just the sound of my own labored breathing and the crunch of my boots on the forest floor. The fog began to thin. Whether from the increasing elevation or the strengthening daylight, I couldn't tell. Through gaps in the trees, I caught glimpses of a rocky peak ahead. Dick's Mountain. It had to be. Somehow, in my confused wandering, I'd ended up on the path to my original destination. Relief flooded through me. I had a goal now, a purpose. I would complete my mission, scatter Mara's ashes, and then find my way back to civilization. The trail grew steeper, transitioning from forest to alpine terrain. Stunted spruce and bare rock replaced the twisted hardwoods. The fog had receded to wisps that curled around exposed roots and stone outcroppings. Above me, the summit was visible now, a bald dome of granite thrusting into a sky of perfect, painful blue. I paused to catch my breath and drink from my water bottle. As I surveyed the path ahead, movement caught my eye. A figure on the ridge above, silhouetted against the sky. A hiker. I wasn't alone after all. I raised my arm to wave, a greeting ready on my lips. The words died in my throat as the figure turned. Even at this distance, I could see it wasn't right. The proportions were wrong, limbs too long, torso too narrow. It stood perfectly still, facing me, though I couldn't make out any features. Then it was gone, as if it had stepped behind a rock or dropped below the ridge. But there was nowhere it could have gone so quickly. I told myself it was a trick of light and shadow, a weather-beaten tree stump mistaken for a human form. The mind sees patterns, faces, figures where none exist. Pareidolia, it's called, a survival mechanism from our evolutionary past. But my racing heart knew better. I continued my climb with renewed urgency, no longer stopping to rest. The sooner I reached the summit, completed my task, and began my descent, the better. The sun had risen fully now, burning away the last of the fog and warming the rocks. Under different circumstances, it would have been a glorious day for hiking. The final approach to the summit was a scramble over bare rock. I used my hands as much as my feet, pulling myself up the steep incline. At last, I crested the ridge and stood upon the summit of Dick's Mountain. The view was spectacular, a 360-degree panorama of the Adirondack high peaks. To the north, the Great Range with Mount Marcy, New York's highest point. To the east, Lake Champlain and the Green Mountains of Vermont. South and west, an endless sea of mountains and forests. On a clear day like this, you could see for 50 miles or more. I shrugged off my pack and retrieved Mara's urn. It was surprisingly heavy for its size, a weight I'd carried figuratively since her death and literally on this journey. I unscrewed the lid and stood facing east, where the sun continued its climb into the sky. This was the moment I'd planned, rehearsed in my mind 100 times. I would say something profound, something worthy of Mara and the love we'd shared. But standing there, wind whipping around me, the words wouldn't come. In the end, I simply whispered, "I miss you," and upended the urn. The ashes caught in the wind, a gray cloud that billowed and dispersed, carried away toward the distant mountains. I watched until the last visible mote had vanished, feeling a conflicting mixture of grief and release. It was done, my promise fulfilled. I allowed myself a moment to sit on the summit, to absorb the accomplishment and the beauty surrounding me. Then practicality reasserted itself. I needed to find my way back to civilization before nightfall. I studied the surrounding terrain, trying to identify landmarks from my map. That's when I noticed the structure. From my elevated position, I could see it nestled in a valley to the north, a small wooden building that could only be the cabin I'd stayed in. The Hollows. It looked different from above, older somehow, the roof partially collapsed on one side, but it was unmistakably the same building, and it wasn't alone. Surrounding it in a rough circle were other structures, 6 or 7 cabins of similar size and construction. From this distance, they looked abandoned, reclaimed by the forest. Trees grew through some of their roofs. Walls had collapsed in others. A settlement. A small, forgotten community high in the mountains, unmarked on any map I'd studied. As I stared, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, movement caught my eye. Between 2 of the distant cabins, a figure emerged, then another, and another. They moved with an odd, lurching gait, heads tipped at unnatural angles. Even from my perch a mile above, something about their movement raised the hair on my arms. They were looking up at the mountain, looking at me. I scrambled to my feet, shoving the empty urn into my pack. I needed to leave, to get as far from this place as possible before nightfall. I studied my map frantically, trying to identify the quickest route down the opposite side of the mountain, away from the settlement. There, a marked trail leading southeast toward Round Pond. From there, I could follow the pond outlet to Elk Lake Road. It would be a long day of hiking, but if I pushed hard, I could reach the road before dark. I set off at a near run, half sliding down the steep eastern slope of Dix. The marked trail appeared exactly where the map indicated, a blessed bit of normality in what had become an increasingly surreal experience. I followed it gratefully, pushing my tired legs to maintain a grueling pace. By mid-afternoon, I'd reached Round Pond, a small alpine lake nestled between mountains. The trail continued along its northern shore before following the outlet stream downhill. According to my map, the stream would eventually join the Branch River, which paralleled Elk Lake Road. I paused only long enough to refill my water bottles and swallow a protein bar. As I knelt by the shoreline, movement reflected in the still water caught my attention. I looked up sharply. On the opposite shore, partially obscured by spruce trees, stood a figure watching me. Not one of the distant, lurching forms I'd seen from the summit. This one was clearly human in proportion and stance, a woman with long, dark hair. My heart leaped into my throat. "Mara!" I called out, my voice breaking. The figure didn't respond, didn't wave or call back, just stood watching, face indistinct at this distance. I rubbed my eyes, certain I was hallucinating from exhaustion and emotional strain. When I looked again, the shore was empty. I told myself it had been another hiker, though I'd seen no one else on the trails and no other cars at the trailhead. Or perhaps just a tree, its branches configured in a way that my desperate mind had shaped into a human form. I shouldered my pack and continued on, following the outlet stream as it tumbled down the mountainside. The path here was less distinct, forcing me to pick my way carefully over rocks and fallen trees. The forest closed in around me, denser than before. The quality of light changed as afternoon stretched toward evening. Long shadows reached across the trail, and the temperature began to drop. I checked my watch. 4:43 p.m. Less than 2 hours of daylight remaining, and I wasn't sure how far I still had to go. I increased my pace, ignoring the burning in my thighs and the developing blisters on my heels. The trail dipped and curved, following the increasingly swift stream. According to my map, I should reach the Branch River, and shortly after, the road, within another hour of hiking. But as the light failed and the forest grew darker, I began to doubt. The stream I was following seemed to be turning north, away from the direction where the road should be. Had I missed a junction? Followed a tributary rather than the main outlet? I stopped to check my map and compass again. The compass was still malfunctioning, the needle spinning lazily before pointing in a direction I knew couldn't be north. I was beginning to suspect it wasn't faulty equipment, but something about this particular area that affected it. Some mineral in the ground, perhaps, or... A twig snapped behind me. I froze, ears straining. Another snap, closer this time. Someone, or something, was moving through the forest toward me. I turned slowly. At first, I saw nothing but trees and gathering shadow. Then movement, a dark shape slipping from one trunk to another, too quickly to properly see. It was large, whatever it was, person-sized at least. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm a hiker, just passing through." No response but the gurgle of the stream and the rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. I turned back to the trail, walking faster now. The feeling of being watched, of being followed, was overwhelming. Every few steps I glanced over my shoulder, catching glimpses of movement, always just at the edge of vision. The trail curved around a massive boulder, and as I rounded it, I stopped short. The path ahead was blocked by a fallen tree, a huge old-growth pine that must have come down in a recent storm. Its trunk was as thick as a car, its root ball a tangled mass of earth and stone taller than me. I would have to go around. The right side dropped off steeply to the stream, now a raging torrent some 20 feet below. The left side meant pushing through dense underbrush on a steep uphill slope. I chose left, scrambling up the bank and forcing my way through tangled rhododendron. Branches clawed at my clothes and skin. It was slow going, and by the time I made it around the fallen giant, twilight had deepened to near darkness. I switched on my headlamp, its beam cutting a tunnel of light through the gloom. I needed to find a place to camp for the night. Continuing in darkness on an unclear trail was asking for an injury. Ahead, the forest opened slightly into a small clearing. It would do. I began to set up camp with practiced efficiency, though my hands trembled with exhaustion and lingering fear. Tent up, sleeping bag unrolled, stove assembled for a quick meal. As I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. The forest had fallen unnaturally silent. No owls calling, no small creatures rustling in the undergrowth. Just my own breathing and the soft sounds of my movement. I finished my preparations and crawled into my tent, zipping the door closed with a sense of futile security. The thin nylon wouldn't stop anything determined to get in, but it created an illusion of separation between myself and whatever lurked in the forest. Despite my exhaustion, sleep eluded me. I lay awake, listening to the wind in the trees and the distant rush of the stream. Every sound seemed magnified, significant. A branch creaking, leaves rustling, footsteps. Footsteps! I held my breath, straining to hear. Yes, slow, deliberate footsteps circling my tent. Not the four-footed pattern of a deer or bear, but the bipedal gait of a human, or something walking on two legs. The steps completed a circle and paused directly in front of my tent door. I could see the shadow of a figure projected against the nylon by the ambient moonlight. Tall, unnaturally thin, standing perfectly still. Then a voice, raspy, dry, like leaves blowing across stone. Elijah. My name. It knew my name. "Who's there?" I managed to croak out. "She's waiting for you." The voice was neither male nor female, but something in between, or perhaps both at once. "At the Hollows. She's always been waiting." "Who?" I demanded, though I feared I knew the answer. "Who's waiting?" "Mara." The name hit me like a physical blow. I fumbled with the tent zipper, yanking it open, ready to confront whoever was playing this cruel joke. The clearing was empty. I swept my headlamp beam across the surrounding forest. Nothing but trees and shadows. No sign that anyone had been there moments before. Had I dreamed it? Dozed off without realizing and experienced some kind of hypnagogic hallucination? But no. I was still atop my sleeping bag, still fully dressed. I hadn't been asleep. I closed the tent and secured it, then lay back down, my mind racing. The voice had said Mara was waiting at the Hollows, at that strange cabin I'd found. But that was impossible. Mara was dead. I'd scattered her ashes myself just hours ago. Yet, a part of me, a desperate, grief-stricken part, wondered, what if? What if somehow, in this strange corner of the wilderness where compasses didn't work and mysterious settlements appeared, something impossible had happened? I pushed the thought away. This was madness. Grief and exhaustion were making me irrational. Whatever was happening, whether supernatural or, more likely, some elaborate trick being played by locals, I needed to get out of these mountains as quickly as possible. With that resolution, I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. The nightmare, when it came, was vivid in a way that transcended ordinary dreams. I was back at the Hollows, standing before the cabin door. The surrounding forest was shrouded in mist, ghostly shapes of trees just barely visible. The door swung open of its own accord, revealing darkness within. A voice called from inside, Mara's voice, unmistakable and achingly familiar. "Eli, is that you? I've been waiting so long." I stepped forward, drawn by her voice despite a growing sense of dread. As I crossed the threshold, the cabin expanded, the single room stretching into an impossibly long corridor lined with doors. At the far end stood a figure, back turned to me, dark hair falling past her shoulders. "Mara!" I called, my dream self moving forward. She began to turn, slowly. Too slowly. I walked faster, desperate to see her face, to confirm it was really her, but the corridor stretched with each step I took, keeping her at the same distance. "You need to leave, Eli," she said, still turning. "It's not me. It was never me." "What do you mean?" I was running now, the corridor extending endlessly before me. "Mara, wait!" "Go home," she said, her voice fading. "While you still can." I jolted awake, heart hammering. Outside my tent, the forest was bright with morning light. I checked my watch. 7:23 a.m. I'd slept later than intended. I packed quickly, eager to be moving. The events of the night, the voice outside my tent, the disturbing dream, had only strengthened my resolve to leave this place as soon as possible. The trail was clearer in daylight, a distinct path following the stream downhill. I made good progress, pushing through fatigue, my mind fixed on reaching the road. According to my map, I couldn't be more than 4 or 5 miles from Elk Lake Road. Around mid-morning, the trail joined a broader, more established path, the Elk Lake Marcy Trail. My spirits lifted. This was a major route, well-traveled and clearly marked with DEC trail markers. I turned south, following the trail downhill toward where it would eventually meet the road. The forest here was different, healthier, more normal. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, dappling the ground with patches of gold. Birds called from the branches. A red squirrel chattered angrily as I passed its territory. After another hour of hiking, I heard the sound of a vehicle in the distance, the unmistakable rumble of an engine. Civilization! I quickened my pace, almost running down the trail. Then I stopped, confusion flooding through me. The trail ahead forked. One branch continued south, following the gentle grade downhill. The other turned sharply west, climbing again. Neither direction was marked as leading to a road. I pulled out my map, studying it closely. According to the map, there should be no fork here, just a straight shot south to Elk Lake Road. I looked up, puzzled, and noticed a wooden sign nailed to a tree at the junction. It was weathered, the lettering faded but still legible. South, Elk Lake Road, 3.2 miles. West, The Hollows, 1.7 miles. The Hollows, the name of the cabin where this nightmarish journey had begun. But this time it was marked, officially recognized, on a DEC trail sign. It made no sense. How could a settlement large enough to be signposted not appear on any of my maps? More importantly, why was the trail leading me back there? I'd been heading south, away from the area where I'd found the cabin. How could it now be to the west? I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was as if the wilderness itself were conspiring to return me to that place, as if I were being herded. The rational choice was obvious. Continue south toward the road. Whatever the Hollows was, whatever strange events were occurring in this corner of the Adirondacks, I wanted no part of them. I took 3 steps down the southern fork. "She's waiting for you." The voice from last night echoed in my memory. Was it possible? Could Mara somehow be there at the Hollows? Grief can make you crazy. I knew this. In the months since her death, I'd had moments, standing in the grocery store, waking in the night, when I was certain I'd seen her, heard her voice. Brief, heart-stopping instants where the impossible seemed real. This was no different. A manifestation of loss, of guilt, of the human mind's difficulty in accepting the finality of death. And yet, I turned and looked at the western fork. It climbed gently at first, then more steeply, disappearing around a bend in the forest. Going that way meant returning to the unsettling cabin, perhaps encountering whatever had spoken outside my tent. It meant embracing madness, but if there was even the slightest chance... I closed my eyes, fighting an internal battle between reason and desperate hope. When I opened them, my decision was made. I turned west toward the Hollows. The trail climbed steadily, switchbacking up the side of a ridge. It was well maintained, clearly an official route despite its absence from my map. Blue DC trail markers appeared at regular intervals, confirming I was on an established path. After about an hour of steady hiking, I crested the ridge and looked down into a small valley. There, nestled among the trees, was the settlement I'd glimpsed from Dick's Mountain. 7 cabins arranged in a rough circle around a central clearing. From this distance, they appeared abandoned. Weathered gray wood, sagging roofs, doors hanging askew. A ghost town in the wilderness. I descended into the valley, approaching the settlement with growing apprehension. As I drew closer, I could see that most of the cabins were indeed in an advanced state of decay. Walls had collapsed, roofs caved in. Nature was reclaiming them, saplings growing through floorboards, vines crawling up walls. But one cabin stood in better condition than the rest, the one I'd stayed in 2 nights before, the Hollows. I approached it cautiously, alert for any movement or sound from within. The door was closed, though I distinctly remembered leaving it open in my hasty departure. "Hello?" I called out, stopping several yards from the cabin. "Is anyone there?" Only silence answered me. I moved closer, mounting the single step to the small porch. The 3 scratches were still visible on the door, alongside the crude stick figure carving. I raised my hand to knock, then hesitated. What was I doing? This was madness. Mara was dead. I'd scattered her ashes myself. Whatever had spoken my name in the night, whatever had drawn me back to this place, it wasn't her. I turned to leave. "Eli," her voice from inside the cabin. Soft, questioning, achingly familiar. I froze, heart thundering in my chest. "Mara?" I whispered. "I'm here, Eli. I've been waiting." My hand reached for the door of its own accord, pushing it open. The cabin's interior was exactly as I remembered it. Stone fireplace, rough wooden table, narrow bed with its faded quilt. But now, seated in one of the chairs, was Mara. She looked exactly as she had before the illness. Dark hair falling in waves around her face, green eyes bright with intelligence and humor. She wore hiking clothes, flannel shirt, sturdy pants, boots, just as she had on countless trips we'd taken together. "You came back," she said, her voice carrying that slight rasp I'd loved so much. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. This was impossible. I had to be hallucinating, experiencing some kind of breakdown brought on by grief and exhaustion. And yet she looked so real, solid, present. "Aren't you going to say something?" She tilted her head, a gesture so quintessentially Mara that my chest ached with recognition. "You're not real," I managed finally. "You can't be. Mara is dead. I scattered her ashes yesterday." She smiled sadly. "Did you? Are you sure about that?" I thought of the urn in my pack, the gray ash dispersing in the wind from Dick's Mountain summit. It had happened. I was certain. Wasn't I? "This isn't possible," I whispered. "Eli, please." She stood, taking a step toward me. "I don't know what's happening either. All I know is I've been here waiting for you. I heard you coming up the mountain. I felt you near, and now you're here." She reached out a hand. "Touch me. I'm real." I wanted to believe. God, how I wanted to. But something felt wrong. The cabin seemed darker than it should be, despite sunlight outside. The air felt thick, difficult to breathe. And Mara's eyes. There was something not quite right about them. The color was perfect, that deep forest green I'd gazed into countless times. But behind them was emptiness, a void where her vibrant spirit should have been. I took a step back. "What are you?" Her expression changed, subtle but unmistakable. A hardening around the eyes, a tightening of the lips. Not anger, exactly. Disappointment. Calculation. "I'm your wife," she said, the rasp in her voice more pronounced. "I'm Mara." "No," I said, more firmly now. "My wife died 6 weeks ago. I held her hand as she went. I felt her pulse stop. I watched them close the crematorium door." Her face shifted again, a brief flicker of something inhuman passing across her features like a shadow, too quick to fully register, but enough to send ice down my spine. "You never could just accept a gift, could you, Eli?" The voice was still Mara's, but the cadence was wrong. The inflection. Always questioning, analyzing, looking for the catch. "What do you mean, a gift?" I was backing toward the door now, feeling behind me for the handle. "We could have had years together. Right here, just the two of us." She gestured around the cabin. "I rebuilt it for you, made it perfect." "Who are you?" I demanded again. "What is this place?" She sighed, a sound that started human but ended in something like wind through dead branches. "The locals used to call us hollow folk, the ones who came before, the ones who stay." As she spoke, her form seemed to waver, like heat rising from summer asphalt, her edges blurred, features becoming less distinct. "We need bodies to walk among you. Vessels." Her voice was changing too, the familiar rasp deepening, multiplying, as if several voices spoke in unison. "Most we can only hold for a little while, but loved ones, those we can keep. The connection is stronger." I fumbled with the door handle, yanking it open. Sunlight spilled into the cabin, illuminating the figure before me. What stood there was no longer fully Mara. Her outline remained. The height, the basic shape, but details were fading, replaced by something dark and shifting, like smoke given partial solidity. Only the eyes remained unchanged, those perfect green irises floating in a face that was becoming less human by the second. "You scattered her ashes here," the thing said, its voice now a chorus of whispers. "Part of her remains. Enough for me. Enough for us." I stumbled backward through the doorway, nearly falling down the porch step. Outside, the clearing looked different. The other cabins, previously in various states of decay, now appeared whole. Smoke rose from their chimneys, and figures moved between them, humanoid but wrong, their proportions subtly distorted, movements jerky and uncoordinated. They were turning toward me now, heads swiveling with mechanical precision. Some had faces, crude approximations of human features. Others were featureless save for eyes, all identical green eyes. Mara's eyes. "You can't leave," the thing in the cabin said, advancing to the doorway. Its form continued to shift and roil, occasionally resolving into a simulacrum of Mara before dissolving again. "None who find the hollows ever truly leave." I ran, away from the cabin, away from the settlement, crashing through underbrush with no thought for direction or trail. Behind me, I heard movement. Not the sound of human pursuit, but something stranger, a rushing, rustling sound like a flock of enormous birds taking flight. I glanced back once and immediately wished I hadn't. The things were following, but not on foot. They moved through the air in undulating streams, their forms fluid and smoke-like, weaving between trees with impossible speed. I redoubled my efforts, legs burning, lungs heaving. I had no plan beyond escape, no destination but away. The forest grew denser, slowing my progress. Branches clawed at my face and arms. Roots threatened to trip me with every step. And all the while, the rushing sound grew closer. I broke through a thicket into a small clearing and found myself at the edge of a cliff. Below, a river churned through a rocky gorge some 30 feet down. The Branch River, it had to be. The sound of pursuit was immediately behind me now. I turned to face it, back to the cliff edge. They emerged from the forest, 7 figures once human in form but now only vaguely so. They moved like marionettes with half their strings cut, lurching and swaying. And leading them was the thing that had worn Mara's face, now barely recognizable as her but still carrying those green eyes. "Don't make this difficult, Eli," it said, Mara's voice now just one strand in a tapestry of overlapping whispers. "Everyone joins the hollows eventually. Everyone becomes hollow." I looked over my shoulder at the churning river below. A fall from this height onto rocks would likely be fatal, but if I hit the water instead— "She's still here, you know," the creature continued, taking a step closer. "Part of her, the part that loved you, you could be with her again." For a moment, one terrible, traitorous moment, I considered it. To see Mara again, to hear her voice, even if it wasn't really her. Wasn't that what I'd wanted? Wasn't that why I'd turned west at the trail junction instead of south toward safety? But Mara, the real Mara, wouldn't want this. She'd been fierce in her independence, in her respect for natural boundaries. "We're visitors in the wild," she'd often say during our hikes. "We don't get to impose our will here. We observe, we appreciate, and we leave it as we found it." These things, whatever they were, violated that principle. They took, they consumed, they imposed. "No," I said firmly. "Mara is gone, and I don't believe there's any part of her in you." The creature's face rippled with rage, its form expanding, darkening. "Then you'll join us another way," it hissed, the chorus of voices now a discordant shriek. "Your body will serve, with or without your cooperation." It lunged forward, the others following, a wave of writhing shadow. I turned and jumped. For one endless moment, I was suspended in air, the gorge yawning beneath me. Then gravity took hold and I plummeted toward the river below. I hit the water hard, the impact knocking the breath from my lungs. The current immediately seized me, tumbling me through icy rapids. I fought to the surface, gasping for air before being pulled under again. Rocks loomed in the churning water. I managed to avoid the largest, but smaller ones struck my legs, my back, my shoulders. Each impact was a bright point of pain, but I remained conscious, focused only on survival. The river curved, widened, the current easing slightly. I swam for the shore with the last of my strength, fingers finding purchase on slick rocks. I dragged myself out of the water, collapsing on the riverbank, lungs burning, body battered. For several minutes, I could only lie there, coughing up river water, waiting for my vision to clear and my breathing to steady. When I finally looked up, I saw what I'd been hoping for, a dirt road running parallel to the river, perhaps 50 yards through the trees. Elk Lake Road. I'd made it. I got to my feet gingerly, taking inventory of my injuries. Bruised, possibly cracked ribs, a deep gash on my left calf, various scrapes and contusions, but nothing broken, nothing immediately life-threatening. My pack was gone, lost in the river. With it, the empty urn, my map, my supplies, everything except what was in my pockets. I still had my car keys, my wallet, and miraculously my phone, waterlogged but perhaps salvageable. I limped toward the road, alert for any sign of pursuit. But the forest was quiet now, the only sounds the river behind me and the occasional call of a bird. When I reached the road, I nearly wept with relief. It was unmistakably man-made, its surface graded gravel, tire tracks visible in the dirt. I turned south, the direction that should lead to the main highway and eventually to civilization. I walked for what felt like hours, my pace slowed by injury and exhaustion. The road curved and dipped, following the river valley. No vehicles passed, no hikers appeared. I was alone in the wilderness, but at least now on a path that would lead to safety. As the afternoon waned, I rounded a bend and saw a welcome sight, a small parking area with a single vehicle. My Subaru, exactly as I'd left it. I stopped, confusion flooding through me. This wasn't possible. I'd parked at the Dix Mountain trailhead miles from here. How could my car be at this random pull-off on Elk Lake Road? Unless... I approached cautiously, circling the vehicle. It was definitely mine. Same dented bumper, same "Leave no trace" sticker on the rear window, same kayak rack on top. I tried the door, unlocked as I'd left it. Inside, on the passenger seat, lay my backpack, the one I'd lost in the river. I backed away, pulse racing. This wasn't right. Something was very wrong. I turned in a slow circle, studying my surroundings. The parking area, the road, the forest edge. Everything looked normal, yet the trees. They were the same species I'd seen throughout my hike, maple, birch, pine, but they seemed off somehow, too uniform in their placement, too perfect in their proportions. And there was no sound. No bird calls, no insect buzzing, no wind through branches, just a perfect, unnatural silence. No, I whispered, the truth dawning with horrible clarity. No, no, no. I hadn't escaped. This wasn't Elk Lake Road. This wasn't the real world at all. As if in response to my realization, the scene before me began to change, subtly at first, colors fading, edges softening, then more dramatically. The trees flattened, becoming two-dimensional, like stage props. The sky darkened to an impossible shade of red. The ground beneath my feet shifted, no longer solid but spongy, yielding. And my car melted, metal and glass flowing like wax, reforming into the now familiar shape of a small wooden cabin. The Hollows. The door swung open, and in the darkness beyond, green eyes gleamed. "Did you really think it would be that easy, Eli?" Mara's voice and not Mara's voice. No one escapes the Hollows. Not until we're finished with them. I fell to my knees, strength finally failing. They had won. Whatever these things were, they had me. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. "Eli," a new voice called, distant, faint, but familiar. Not Mara this time, but, "Eli, can you hear me? Squeeze my hand if you can hear me." I felt pressure on my right hand, warm and solid. Real in a way nothing had felt since finding the cabin. "He's responding. Dr. Mercer, we have a response." More voices now, overlapping, urgent. The world around me, the false woods, the melted car, the cabin, began to fade, replaced by a harsh white light and the antiseptic smell of a hospital. I opened my eyes to see a nurse leaning over me, her face breaking into a relieved smile. "Welcome back, Mr. Morris," she said. "You gave us quite a scare." I tried to speak, but my throat was too dry, my voice refusing to work. The nurse offered me a sip of water through a straw, then explained what had happened. I'd been found unconscious at the Dix Mountain trailhead, slumped over my steering wheel. Severe hypothermia, dehydration, early stages of rhabdomyolysis from muscle breakdown. I'd been in an induced coma for 4 days while they stabilized my condition. "You're very lucky," she said. "Another hiker spotted your car and checked on you. If they hadn't found you when they did..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. "I would have died, alone in my car at a remote trailhead. But how? The last clear memory I had was of entering the strange cabin, the hollows, that first night. Everything after that, Dix Mountain, scattering Mara's ashes, the settlement, the pursuit, the river, had it all been a hallucination, a hypothermia-induced dream as I slowly froze in my car? I gestured weakly for something to write with. The nurse provided a small whiteboard and marker. "Urn?" I wrote, my hand shaking. "Mara's ashes?" The nurse looked confused, then concerned. "I'll check your personal effects," she said, leaving the room briefly. When she returned, she carried a small bag containing the clothes I'd been wearing and the contents of my pockets. "This was everything you had with you," she said. "No urn was found in your car." I frowned, trying to make sense of it. If I hadn't left the parking lot, if I'd never made it to Dix Mountain, then where were Mara's ashes? Still in the trunk of my car, perhaps? A doctor entered, Dr. Mercer, according to his ID badge, and began examining me, checking vitals, asking simple questions to assess my cognitive function. I could only respond with nods or by writing on the whiteboard, my voice still unreliable. "You're making an excellent recovery, Mr. Morris," he said finally, "but I'd like to keep you one more night for observation. You experienced significant trauma, and your body needs time to heal." I nodded agreement, too exhausted to protest even if I'd wanted to. As the doctor turned to leave, a thought struck me. I quickly scrawled on the whiteboard, "Did I have frostbite? Injuries?" Dr. Mercer looked puzzled. "No, Mr. Morris. No frostbite. Your body temperature was dangerously low, but you hadn't begun to experience tissue damage. And aside from a few minor scrapes and bruises, consistent with someone who'd been hiking, you had no injuries." No injuries. Not the deep gash on my calf, not the bruised ribs, not the countless scrapes and contusions I'd received in the river. Because I'd never been in the river, never jumped from the cliff, never fled the hollow folk. It had all been in my mind. I slept fitfully that night, dreaming of green eyes watching me through darkness. When I woke, my voice had returned, hoarse but functional. The nurse, a different one from yesterday, helped me sit up, brought me a breakfast I couldn't stomach, and informed me that if my condition continued to improve, I'd likely be discharged by afternoon. I asked her about my car, and she confirmed it had been brought to the hospital parking lot by the local sheriff's department. My keys were with my personal effects. "There is something else," she added, reaching into a drawer beside my bed. "This was found in your vehicle. The admitting nurse forgot to include it with your other belongings." She handed me a small metal urn, Mara's urn. My heart skipped a beat as I took it. It felt lighter than I remembered, but otherwise exactly the same. I unscrewed the lid with trembling hands, empty. The ashes were gone. Where? My voice caught, and I had to start again. Where exactly was my car found? At the Dix Mountain trailhead? The nurse checked my chart. Yes, that's what it says here. Is something wrong? No, I lied, just trying to piece things together. Later that day, I was discharged with instructions to follow up with my primary care physician and to avoid strenuous activity for at least 2 weeks. I nodded and signed the necessary forms, my mind elsewhere. My car was indeed in the hospital lot, looking exactly as I remembered leaving it. I sat behind the wheel for several long minutes before starting the engine, half expecting the world to shift and change, revealing itself as another illusion. But nothing happened. The engine turned over. The radio played. The hospital remained a hospital. The parking lot, a parking lot. I drove slowly, cautiously back toward Albany and my empty apartment. As I passed the turnoff for Dix Mountain, I glanced in my rearview mirror. For just an instant, I thought I saw a figure standing by the roadside, tall, too thin, with long arms and Mara's green eyes. Then it was gone, and there was only the empty road behind me. I've told no one else this story. Who would believe it? Even I'm not sure I believe it. The doctors say I likely experienced hallucinations due to hypothermia and grief. A plausible, rational explanation. But sometimes, on the edge of sleep, I hear the rustle of movement outside my bedroom window. And sometimes, in dreams, I return to the hollows, where something with Mara's eyes and not Mara's voice tells me I never truly left. And the urn remains empty. My name is Marcus Reeves, and I am 34 years old. This happened in October 2024. I used to think the most frightening things in life were concrete. Losing a job, getting sick, dying alone. But after what happened in the Adirondack Mountains, I know better. There are things lurking in the wilderness that defy explanation. Things that wait for people like me to wander too far from the safety of civilization. My sister Sarah died 3 months before our trip. A hiking accident, they said. She fell from a cliff face in the remote backcountry of the Adirondacks High Peaks wilderness. Her body wasn't found for 5 days. By then, the elements and wildlife had done their work. The park rangers told us not to view her remains, but I insisted. I needed to see, to know it was really her. I've regretted that decision every day since. She wouldn't want us to stop living. My brother-in-law Daniel told me at the funeral. She'd want us to keep going to the places she loved. That's how, despite my better judgment, I found myself heading into those same mountains with Daniel and my German shepherd, Rusty, on what Daniel called a healing trip. We would hike to one of Sarah's favorite spots, a secluded area near Panther Gorge, and scatter some of her ashes. "Bring closure," Daniel said. As if closure was something you could buy at an outdoor supply store along with freeze-dried meals and bear spray. I was skeptical from the beginning. Daniel had changed since Sarah's death. He'd lost weight, developed an almost manic energy. He talked about connecting with her out in the wilderness. I figured grief takes many forms, and maybe this trip was what he needed. The forecast predicted clear autumn weather for our 5-day trek. Peak foliage season meant the mountains would be ablaze with red and gold. We started from the Garden Trailhead near Keene Valley with plans to reach Panther Gorge by the 3rd day. The first signs of trouble came earlier than I expected. On our first night, camped near Johns Brook Lodge, I woke to Rusty's low growl. The dog stood rigid at the entrance to my tent, hackles raised, staring into the darkness. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, reaching for my flashlight. Outside, the woods were silent. Too silent. No crickets, no rustling leaves, no distant owl calls, just a dead, oppressive quiet that seemed to press against my eardrums. I scanned the perimeter with my light, the beam cutting through the darkness and illuminating nothing but trees and underbrush. Nothing there. But Rusty wouldn't settle. He kept growling, his eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. "Daniel?" I called softly. "You awake?" No answer from his tent. I unzipped my tent flap and peered out. The autumn air bit at my face, unnaturally cold. My breath formed thick clouds in front of me. Despite the chill, I felt sweat beading on my forehead. I crawled out, zipping the flap behind me to keep Rusty contained while I investigated. Our campsite looked undisturbed. The remains of our fire glowed faintly in the pit. Daniel's tent stood dark and silent. "Daniel?" I called again, louder this time. I approached his tent, my footsteps crunching on the dried leaves. When I reached for the zipper, a voice behind me nearly stopped my heart. "I'm here, Marcus." I whirled around. Daniel stood at the edge of our campsite, his face pale in the moonlight. He was barefoot, wearing only a t-shirt and shorts despite the freezing temperature. "Jesus, you scared me. What are you doing out there?" "I heard something," he said flatly. "Thought I'd check it out." "In your bare feet. It's freezing." He looked down at his feet as if noticing them for the first time. I didn't realize. I was dreaming about Sarah. She was calling me from the woods. Inside my tent, Rusty's growling intensified. "Let's get you back to your tent," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You'll catch your death out here." Daniel nodded absently and allowed me to lead him back. As we passed my tent, Rusty erupted into frenzied barking. "Quiet, Rusty," I hissed, but the dog continued, more agitated than I'd ever seen him. "Your dog doesn't like me," Daniel said, his voice eerily calm. "He's just on edge. Something's got him spooked." I got Daniel settled in his tent and returned to mine. Rusty was still agitated, pacing the small confines of the tent, but his barking had subsided to an occasional whine. I pulled him close, taking comfort in his warmth. "It's okay, boy," I whispered, stroking his fur. "Just some night critters." But I couldn't shake the unease that had settled over me. Something felt wrong about Daniel's behavior, about the unnatural silence of the woods. Maybe this trip was a mistake. Maybe we were both still too raw from Sarah's death to be out here, in the place where she died. I barely slept that night, drifting in and out of consciousness, plagued by half-formed nightmares. In one, I was running through dense forest, pursued by something I couldn't see. In another, I stood at the edge of a cliff, looking down at Sarah's broken body far below. Only when I looked closer, it wasn't Sarah at all. It was Daniel, his eyes open and staring directly at me. I woke before dawn, exhausted and on edge. Outside, a thick fog had descended, obscuring the woods around us. Daniel emerged from his tent looking haggard but more like himself. "Bad night?" I asked, firing up my portable stove to make coffee. "Strange dreams," he replied, rubbing his eyes. "About Sarah." "Me too," I admitted. "Maybe we're just feeding off each other's anxiety." Daniel nodded, accepting the steaming cup I handed him. "Maybe, but I feel closer to her out here, like she's watching over us." I didn't know how to respond to that. The thought of Sarah's presence didn't comfort me. It unsettled me. I busied myself breaking camp while Daniel studied the map, plotting our day's journey. "We should reach Slant Rock by afternoon," he said. "From there, it's only a day's hike to Panther Gorge." I nodded, focused on packing up my gear. Rusty stayed unusually close to me, his normal enthusiasm for the trail conspicuously absent. Usually, he'd be bounding around the campsite, eager to explore, but today he stuck to my side like glue. The fog lingered as we hit the trail, turning the forest into a ghostly, muffled world. The brilliant autumn foliage was reduced to occasional bursts of color looming out of the whiteness. The trail was slick with dew, making the already challenging terrain treacherous. We hiked mostly in silence, conserving energy for the steep ascents. Around midday, we stopped for lunch on a rocky outcrop. The fog had begun to lift, revealing glimpses of the valley below. As I unwrapped a protein bar, I noticed Daniel staring intently at something in the distance. "What is it?" I asked, following his gaze. "I thought I saw someone on that ridge," he said, pointing to a distant slope. "A woman." I squinted, but saw nothing but rocks and trees. Probably just another hiker. She was wearing a red jacket, Daniel continued, his voice tightening. Sarah had a red jacket. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Daniel, that's not possible. I know what I saw, he insisted, his eyes never leaving the distant ridge. It's the altitude, I said gently. The thin air plays tricks on you. He finally turned to me, his expression unreadable. You don't believe me. I believe you saw something, I conceded. But it wasn't Sarah. Daniel fell silent, picking at his food without eating much. I watched him with growing concern. His grief was manifesting in ways I hadn't anticipated. And out here, miles from civilization, that could be dangerous. We resumed hiking shortly after, the trail growing steeper and more challenging. The improved visibility revealed the breathtaking scale of the High Peaks region, rugged mountains stretching in every direction, their slopes painted with autumn colors. Under different circumstances, I might have found it beautiful. Rusty stayed close, occasionally whining for no apparent reason. Each time he did, I found myself scanning our surroundings, looking for whatever had him on edge, but I saw nothing out of the ordinary. By late afternoon, dark clouds had rolled in, threatening rain. We pushed on, hoping to reach Slant Rock before the weather turned. The wind picked up, carrying a damp chill that cut through my layers. The forest had grown denser, the trail narrower. Fallen leaves obscured the path in places, forcing us to move carefully. We should be there by now, Daniel said after we'd been hiking for what felt like hours. He pulled out the map again, frowning. This doesn't make sense. I looked over his shoulder. The map showed that we should have reached Slant Rock Shelter already, but there was no sign of it. Maybe we missed a turn. No, Daniel said firmly. I know these trails. We're on the right path. But there was uncertainty in his voice. He pulled out his GPS device, but the screen remained blank. Battery's dead, he muttered, shaking it in frustration. I checked my phone. No signal, as expected, but the built-in GPS should still work. The screen showed a blue dot in the middle of nowhere, not aligned with any trail on the map. This doesn't make any sense, I said, a trickle of unease running down my spine. According to this, we're way off trail. Daniel grabbed the phone from me, staring at the screen with mounting agitation. That's impossible. We've been following the trail markers all day. I nodded. The yellow DEC trail markers had been clearly visible throughout our hike. I turned to look back the way we'd come. Through the gathering gloom, I could see a marker on a nearby tree, but something about it seemed off. I approached it, suddenly uncertain. The marker was yellow, as it should be, but its edges were jagged and uneven. Nothing like the official DEC markers. It looked almost handmade. I reached out to touch it, and my finger came away with a smear of yellow. Paint. Fresh paint. Daniel, I called, my voice shaking slightly. These aren't real trail markers. He joined me, examining the fake marker with growing horror. But that's not possible. We've been following them for hours. A terrible realization dawned on me. When did we last see an official marker? A real one? Daniel's face went pale. I can't remember. We stood in stunned silence as the implications sank in. Someone had deliberately led us off trail, deep into the wilderness. We need to backtrack, I said firmly, fighting to keep a panic at bay. Find our way back to the real trail. Daniel nodded numbly. Yeah, you're right. But as we turned to retrace our steps, a low rumble of thunder echoed across the mountains. The clouds that had been threatening all afternoon finally opened up, releasing a torrent of icy rain. We need shelter, Daniel shouted over the downpour. We can't backtrack in this. He was right. Within minutes, we were soaked to the skin, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. Hypothermia would become a real threat if we couldn't get dry soon. There, Daniel pointed to a dark shape ahead. I think I see a cave. We stumbled toward it, Rusty leading the way. As we drew closer, I could make out the black mouth of a small cave set into the hillside. It wasn't ideal. Caves in the Adirondacks could house bears or other wildlife, but we had little choice. The entrance was low, forcing us to crouch as we entered. Inside, it widened into a space just large enough for us to stand. Our flashlights revealed a dry, sandy floor and walls of rough-hewn rock. No signs of animal habitation, which was a relief. "We'll wait out the storm here," Daniel said, dropping his pack and beginning to rummage through it for dry clothes. I did the same, helping Rusty shake off the rain before toweling him as best I could with my damp shirt. The dog seemed unusually subdued, huddling against me for warmth. As we changed into what dry clothing we had left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The fake trail markers, the GPS malfunction, the sudden storm, it all felt too coordinated, too deliberate. Who would do this? I asked, more to myself than to Daniel. Who would fake trail markers out here? Maybe it's kids, Daniel suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. A prank. A dangerous prank, I countered. People could die out here if they get lost. Daniel didn't respond, busy laying out his wet clothes on a rock. I watched him, noticing again how much weight he'd lost since Sarah's death. His cheeks were hollow, his eyes sunken and shadowed. "Why did you really want to come out here, Daniel?" I asked suddenly. He paused, not looking at me. "I told you, to scatter Sarah's ashes." "Is that all?" He remained silent for a long moment. Outside, the rain continued to fall in sheets, the wind howling through the trees. "I need to understand what happened to her," he finally said, his voice barely audible above the storm. "The official report says she fell, but Sarah was an experienced hiker. She wouldn't just fall. Accidents happen, even to experienced people," I said gently. "No." Daniel shook his head vehemently. "Not to Sarah. Not like that." "What are you saying?" "I think something happened to her out here. Something unnatural." I stared at him, a chill running through me that had nothing to do with my wet clothes. "Unnatural? Like what?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but since she died, I've been having these dreams. She's trying to tell me something. That's why we need to get to Panther Gorge. That's where I'll find answers." I chose my next words carefully. "Daniel, grief can do strange things to the mind. It can make us see patterns where there aren't any, make us believe things that aren't true." "You think I'm crazy," he said flatly. "No, I think you're grieving. We both are. But chasing ghosts in the wilderness isn't going to bring her back." Daniel's expression hardened. "You don't understand. You didn't see what I saw at the funeral home." "What are you talking about? We saw the same thing." "No." He shook his head slowly. "You weren't in the room when they first showed me her body, before they cleaned her up for you to see." A knot formed in my throat. "What did you see?" "Marks," he whispered. All over her body. Not from the fall, not from animals. Symbols carved into her skin. My blood ran cold. "That's not possible. The coroner would have reported that." "They did," Daniel said. "They ruled it post-mortem animal activity. But I know what I saw, Marcus. Those weren't random. They were deliberate." I didn't know how to respond. If what Daniel was saying was true, it meant Sarah's death wasn't an accident. But the alternative was too horrible to contemplate. Our conversation was interrupted by a sudden growl from Rusty. The dog was staring at the cave entrance, teeth bared. "What is it, boy?" I asked, reaching for my flashlight. Before I could turn it on, a blinding flash of lightning illuminated the cave entrance, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. And in that flash, I saw a figure silhouetted against the storm. A tall, gaunt shape that seemed to be looking directly at us. When the darkness returned, the figure was gone. "Did you see that?" I gasped, fumbling with my flashlight. "See what?" Daniel asked, but his voice was strange, distant. I finally got my light on and pointed it at the entrance. Nothing there but sheets of rain. "There was someone out there," I insisted, "watching us." Daniel didn't respond. When I turned to him, he was staring at the cave wall, his expression vacant. "Daniel?" He raised a hand, pointing to the rock face. "Look." I directed my light where he indicated and felt my heart skip a beat. Carved into the stone were symbols, crude, angular markings that formed no alphabet I recognized. They looked ancient, weathered by time, yet somehow I knew they hadn't been there when we entered the cave. "It's the same," Daniel whispered, "the same symbols that were on her." I backed away from the wall, pulling Rusty with me. "We need to get out of here, now." "We can't," Daniel said, still staring at the symbols. "Not until we understand." "Understand what?" "Daniel, this isn't right. None of this is right. She's trying to tell us something," he insisted, "through these symbols." "That's not Sarah," I said firmly, grabbing his arm. "Whatever this is, it's not her." Daniel wrenched his arm away, his eyes flashing with sudden anger. "How would you know? You weren't there for her. You were always too busy with your own life to visit, to call. Now you want to pretend you care?" His words stung because there was truth in them. I had been distant, wrapped up in my career, my own problems. Months would go by without me calling Sarah. But that didn't change what was happening now. "We're leaving," I said, gathering my still damp gear. "As soon as the rain lets up a little, we're finding our way back to the trail." Daniel didn't move. "You go. I'm continuing to Panther Gorge. That's suicide, and you know it. We're lost, Daniel. Those fake markers led us who knows where. We need to get back to civilization and report this." "Report what?" he challenged. "That we saw some weird symbols? That we got lost in a rainstorm? They'll think we're crazy." "Better crazy than dead," I retorted, shoving my wet clothes into my pack. Outside, the storm seemed to be easing slightly. The thunder had grown more distant, the rain less intense. It was now or never. "I'm leaving," I announced, hefting my pack. "Are you coming or not?" Daniel stared at me for a long moment, then slowly reached for his own gear. "Fine, but we're coming back. When the storm passes, we're coming back to find answers." I didn't argue. Getting him out of that cave was my priority. We could deal with the rest later. As we prepared to leave, Rusty began growling again, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the cave entrance. I felt a prickle of fear along my spine. "Stay close," I told Daniel, clicking on my flashlight, "and move fast." We emerged into the rainy twilight, immediately soaked by the persistent drizzle. The forest around us had transformed in the storm, becoming an alien landscape of dripping vegetation and mist. Visibility was poor, but I was determined to put as much distance between us and that cave as possible. Using my phone's compass, I chose a direction that I hoped would eventually intersect with a legitimate trail. We trudged through the wet underbrush, slipping on mud and rocks, branches slapping at our faces. Rusty stayed unnervingly close, occasionally looking back the way we had come. We had been walking for about 20 minutes when Daniel suddenly stopped. "Do you hear that?" he asked, tilting his head. I paused, listening. At first I heard nothing but the patter of rain and the rustle of leaves. Then, faintly, I caught it, a sound like singing, distant but clear. A woman's voice, high and sweet, singing a melody I vaguely recognized. A lullaby. The same one Sarah used to sing to her niece when babysitting. "It's her," Daniel whispered, his face lighting up. "It's Sarah." Before I could stop him, he took off, crashing through the underbrush toward the sound. "Daniel, wait!" I shouted, but he was already disappearing into the mist. I ran after him, Rusty at my heels, my heart pounding. The singing grew louder as we ran, but it seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, echoing through the trees in a way that made it impossible to pinpoint. I lost sight of Daniel in the fog. "Daniel," I called, panic rising in my throat. "Daniel, stop!" The singing abruptly ceased. I stood still, straining to hear any sound of Daniel moving through the forest. Nothing. "Daniel," I called again, louder this time. A rustle to my left made me turn. Through the mist I saw a figure moving. Not Daniel, but someone smaller, more slender. a woman in a red jacket. "Sarah?" I whispered, unable to believe my eyes. The figure paused as if hearing me, then continued moving away, deeper into the forest. "Wait!" I called, starting after her. Rusty's bark stopped me. He stood rigid, hackles raised, staring not at the retreating figure but at something behind me. Slowly, I turned. Daniel stood there, his clothes soaked with rain and mud, his face expressionless. "Daniel," I breathed, relief washing over me. "Don't run off like that. I thought I'd lost you." He didn't respond. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see that his eyes were different. The pupils dilated so wide that the irises were nearly invisible. "We need to go back," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "Back to the cave." "No," I said firmly. "We need to find our way out of here." "She's waiting for us," Daniel insisted. "In the cave. She has something to show us." Rusty's growling intensified. I looked down at the dog, then back at Daniel. Something was very wrong. "Who's waiting, Daniel?" A smile spread across his face, a wide, unnatural grin that didn't reach his eyes. "The lady of the hollow. She's been waiting for us for a long time." A chill ran through me. "That's not Sarah you're talking about." "Sarah is gone," he said, still smiling that terrible smile. "The lady has shown me the truth. She's shown me what happened to Sarah, what will happen to all of us eventually." He took a step toward me. Rusty barked furiously. "Stay back," I warned, reaching for the hunting knife on my belt. Daniel laughed, a hollow, echoing sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "You can't fight her, Marcus. She's in the trees, in the rocks, in the earth itself. She's been here for centuries, taking what she needs, when she needs it." "Whatever's happening to you, Daniel, you need to fight it," I pleaded. "This isn't you talking." "I've never seen more clearly," he said, taking another step forward. "The lady showed me everything, how Sarah stumbled into her territory, how she marked her, claimed her, how she called to her from the cliff edge." Horror washed over me as the implications of his words sank in. "This thing killed Sarah?" "Harvested her," Daniel corrected, his grin widening impossibly. "Just as she'll harvest us. But she's merciful. She lets us understand before the end." He lunged at me suddenly, hands outstretched like claws. I stumbled backward, losing my footing on the wet ground and falling hard. Daniel was on me in an instant, his hands around my throat, squeezing with inhuman strength. "She's in me now," he hissed, his face inches from mine. "She's in all of us who enter her domain." I struggled, trying to break his grip, but he was too strong. My vision began to darken at the edges. Suddenly, Rusty attacked, clamping his jaws around Daniel's arm. Daniel screamed, a high, inhuman sound, and released me to deal with the dog. I scrambled away, gasping for air. "Run!" I shouted to Rusty, but the loyal dog held on, growling fiercely as Daniel tried to shake him off. I knew I should help Rusty, but self-preservation took over. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face. Behind me, I heard Rusty yelp in pain. Then silence. Guilt and terror propelled me forward. I had no direction, no plan beyond getting away from whatever Daniel had become. The rain had stopped, but the forest remained shrouded in mist, disorienting and alien. I don't know how long I ran. Minutes? Hours? Time seemed to lose meaning in that mist-shrouded wilderness. Eventually, my lungs burning and legs trembling with exhaustion, I collapsed against a large tree, sliding down to sit at its base. As my breathing slowed, I became aware of my surroundings again. The forest had grown quiet. No birds, no insects, not even the rustle of leaves in the wind. Just silence, heavy and oppressive. I pulled out my phone, hoping against hope for a signal. The screen remained stubbornly empty, the battery indicator flashing red. Almost dead. I switched it off to conserve what little power remained. My options were limited. Without Rusty, without Daniel, without a working GPS or phone, I was truly alone in the wilderness. My only choice was to pick a direction and walk, hoping to eventually cross a trail or reach a road. I chose downhill, reasoning that all waterways eventually lead to civilization. I had my compass, a little food, and my water filter. It would have to be enough. As I pushed myself to my feet, a twig snapped nearby. I froze, listening intently. Another snap, closer this time. Someone, or something, was approaching. "Daniel," I called softly, knowing even as I spoke that it wasn't him. No response, but the sounds continued. Methodical, deliberate footsteps moving through the underbrush, circling my position. I drew my knife again, holding it out before me as I slowly turned, trying to track the sounds. The mist swirled and eddied, playing tricks on my eyes. I thought I saw shapes moving at the edge of visibility. Tall, thin figures that vanished when I tried to focus on them. "Show yourself," I demanded, my voice cracking with fear. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, the forest was completely silent. Then, from behind me, a voice. A woman's voice, but distorted, as if heard underwater. "Marcus!" I whirled around, knife outstretched. A figure stood several yards away, partially obscured by mist. A woman in a red jacket. Sarah. But it wasn't Sarah. Not really. Though the jacket was hers, the face beneath the hood was wrong. The features were blurred, shifting, like looking at a reflection in rippling water. Only the eyes were clear. Black, pupilless orbs that stared unblinkingly at me. "What are you?" I whispered, backing away slowly. The figure tilted its head at an impossible angle. "I am the Lady of the Hollow," it said in that distorted voice, "the keeper of these woods." "What did you do to Daniel? To Sarah?" "They are with me now," it said, taking a step forward. "As you will be." I continued backing away. "I don't want any part of this. Whatever you are, whatever you want, leave me out of it." The thing wearing Sarah's jacket laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You entered my domain willingly, Marcus Reeves. You cannot leave until I permit it." More shapes emerged from the mist, tall, thin figures with elongated limbs and featureless faces. They moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, surrounding me in a loose circle. "Daniel," I called desperately, "if you're in there somewhere, help me." One of the figures stepped forward. As it moved into the dim light, I could see Daniel's features superimposed over something else, something ancient and hungry. "Join us." "Marcus," it said in Daniel's voice, "the lady has shown me wonders beyond imagination. The symbols are a language, a key to understanding what lies beneath." "This isn't real," I insisted, clutching my knife tighter. "None of this is real." "Reality is malleable here," the thing wearing Daniel's face said. "The lady bends it to her will." The circle of figures began to close in, moving with that same jerky, unsettling motion. I spun around, looking for any gap, any way out, but they had me completely surrounded. In desperation, I lunged at the nearest figure, slashing wildly with my knife. The blade passed through it as if through smoke, meeting no resistance. The figure didn't even react, continuing its slow, inexorable advance. I was trapped. The circle tightened further, the figures now just a few feet away. I could smell them, a musty, earthy scent like rotting leaves and stagnant water. "Please," I begged, though I wasn't sure who or what I was begging to. "Please, let me go." The lady stepped into the circle, her features still shifting and blurring beneath the hood of Sarah's red jacket. "You will join us," she said, extending a hand toward me. "You will become part of the Hollow, as all who trespass must." Her fingers were too long, too thin, ending in points rather than nails. As they reached for my face, I closed my eyes, certain that my end had come. A sudden, familiar bark cut through the silence. My eyes flew open as Rusty charged into the circle, snarling and snapping at the figures. Though his fur was matted with blood, he moved with fierce determination, positioning himself between me and the lady. The figures recoiled from the dog, their movements becoming more agitated. The lady made a sound, a high, keening wail that set my teeth on edge, and gestured sharply. The figures began to retreat, melting back into the mist. "Run!" a voice whispered in my ear, Daniel's voice. But him? Really, him. "Run while you can." I didn't hesitate. With Rusty at my side, I broke through the dissolving circle and ran blindly through the forest. Behind us, the lady's wail rose in pitch, becoming a shriek of rage that seemed to shake the very trees. We ran until my legs gave out, until I could taste blood in the back of my throat from the exertion. When I finally collapsed, unable to go any further, Rusty stayed by my side, alert and watchful. As dawn broke, the mist began to lift, revealing a landscape I didn't recognize. We were in a valley I had never seen before, surrounded by peaks that matched no map I had studied. If we were still in the Adirondacks at all, we were in a part untouched by trails or human presence. Yet, as the sun rose higher, burning away the last of the mist, I spotted something in the distance, a thin column of smoke rising from beyond a ridge. Smoke meant people, civilization, safety. With renewed hope, I pushed myself to my feet. "Come on, Rusty, let's go home." The dog whined, looking back the way we had come, but followed when I started walking. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I did, I might see them still following, still watching with their empty eyes. We reached the source of the smoke by midday, a small hunting cabin occupied by an elderly man named Frank Miller. He listened to my half-truthful story about getting separated from my hiking partner during the storm with skepticism but kindness. "These mountains can play tricks on the mind," he said as he drove us back to civilization in his battered pickup truck, "especially in the fall, when the veil between worlds grows thin." I didn't respond, just stroked Rusty's head as he lay exhausted in my lap. Frank glanced at me from time to time, but didn't press for details. As we descended from the mountains, my phone suddenly beeped, signal restored, along with dozens of missed calls and messages. The authorities had been searching for us for 3 days. 3 days. It had felt like only one night in the woods. When we reached the ranger station, I repeated my story. The storm, getting separated from Daniel, finding my way to Frank's cabin. I said nothing about the symbols, the lady, the figures in the mist. Who would believe me? They found Daniel's body 2 days later, at the bottom of a ravine near Panther Gorge. The official cause of death was listed as an accidental fall, just like Sarah. But I know better. I know what happened in those mountains, what lives in the place the locals call the Hollow. I returned to the city afterward, taking Rusty with me. I couldn't bear to leave him after what we'd been through together. He still wakes me sometimes, growling at shadows in the corner of my bedroom, seeing things I cannot. I've researched the area since then, digging through old newspapers and local history books. The Hollow has many names in local legends: the Whispering Forest, the Keeper's Domain, the Place of Shadows. The stories vary, but all speak of people who enter and never return, or return changed in ways no one can explain. Some nights I dream of the lady, her shifting face, her 2 long fingers reaching for me. In those dreams, I see Sarah and Daniel walking beside her, their eyes black and empty. They call to me, telling me that I'm still in the Hollow, that I never left, that sooner or later I'll join them beneath the ancient trees. And sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, I wake to the sound of singing, a lullaby in Sarah's voice coming from just outside my window. I never look. I don't dare. I know the truth now. The symbols in that cave, the ones Daniel said were carved into Sarah's body, they're a language older than humanity, a binding contract written in flesh and stone. The Lady of the Hollow takes what she wants, but she always leaves a mark, a signature of sorts. Her territory has been expanding for centuries, one lost hiker at a time. I've considered telling the authorities everything, warning people about the hollow, about the lady with her shifting face and 2 long fingers, but who would believe me? They'd say it was trauma, grief, the psychological aftermath of losing both my sister and brother-in-law in tragic accidents. So I keep my silence, and I stay away from the wilderness. I've moved to a small apartment in the middle of the city, as far from forests and mountains as I can get. Rusty stays with me always, my guardian against the shadows. But I know it won't last. The lady is patient. She has eternity to wait, to watch, to whisper from the darkness. One day, she'll find me again, reach for me with those impossibly long fingers, and claim me for her own. Until then, I leave this account as a warning. If you find yourself in the Adirondacks, near Panther Gorge, or the area locals call the Hollow, turn back. No matter what you hear, no matter what you see, turn back. The lady is waiting and she knows your name. She knows all our names.